So when I was 26, I moved to a quiet suburb outside Phoenix for a new job. It wasn't anything glamorous, just an operations position at a warehouse, but it paid better than what I was used to, and I was ready for a change. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly older folks, kind of place where people still waved when they saw you. I didn't know anyone at first, but my next-door neighbor Martha introduced herself the same week I moved in. She had to be in her 70s, with short white hair and thick glasses, always wearing floral blouses. She brought over banana bread one evening and talked for nearly an hour on my porch about the neighborhood, her late husband, and her pets. She kept mentioning her babies like they were kids. Said they needed structure, routine, and gentle voices. At first, I assumed it was just dogs or cats, maybe one of those tiny breeds that get spoiled like royalty. She told me she fed them premium food from boutique pet shops and bought special organic snacks. A couple of times she waved receipts in front of me, laughing about how silly it was to spend hundreds every month on pet supplies. She always had large bags from places I'd never heard of, places that didn't look like normal chain stores. One time she came back from shopping with a 50-pound bag labeled Farm Fresh Wholesome Blend, Custom Formula, and I figured she was feeding a small zoo. She'd talk through the fence almost every day if I was in the backyard. Always about the pets, how Whiskers liked his new chew toy, or how Rascal didn't sleep well unless the house was at exactly 72 degrees. She said they didn't like loud music or sudden movements. Sometimes she'd stop in the middle of a sentence and tilt her head like she was listening for something. Then she'd go quiet and say she had to get back in time for their grooming routine or dinner time. She never actually showed me the pets, which I found strange considering how obsessed she was. After a few months, she asked if I could watch them over a weekend while she visited her sister in Tucson. She handed me this folder with what looked like a military operation inside. Pages of feeding times, cleaning instructions, and reminders like, "Do not deviate from the routine. Consistency keeps them calm." It was all handwritten in tight cursive. I told her it was no problem, assuming I'd just be filling up a couple of food bowls and maybe scooping some litter. Saturday morning, I walked over around 8 a.m., using the spare key she'd left in my mailbox. Her house was a single-story ranch with heavy beige curtains drawn over all the windows. It smelled faintly like lavender and vinegar inside. Everything was spotless, like obsessively clean. I called out her name but didn't hear any barking or meowing, just silence, which felt off considering how much she talked about how active they were. I shut the door behind me and stood in the entryway, listening. Then I heard it. A soft, scraping sound from the living room, like something dragging along the floor. I moved slowly down the hall, expecting maybe a dog limping or a cat with an issue. But when I turned into the living room, I stopped. There were 4 adults lying on what I had assumed were pet beds. One was a woman, maybe in her 30s, wearing a full-body cat costume with fur and whiskers painted on her face. She was eating from a ceramic bowl on the floor marked Whiskers. Another was a man in a dog suit, brown, with floppy ears and a tail, sitting beside a water bowl. He looked up at me without saying a word. In the corner, 2 more people in rabbit and fox costumes were curled up next to each other on oversized cushions. All of them were dead silent now. The only sound in the room was the faint crunch of dry food being chewed. The woman in the cat outfit licked her fingers, looked at me, and then turned back to her bowl. No one said anything. I stood there, not sure what to do. The man in the dog suit tilted his head and blinked slowly, like he was waiting for a command. No one seemed surprised to see me, which made it worse. I backed up a step, still staring, trying to understand what I was looking at. The dog guy finally spoke, softly. "We're waiting for our walk." His voice was flat, expressionless. I looked down and realized each bed had a collar and leash coiled neatly next to it. The leashes had names on them: Whiskers, Rascal, Buttons, Max. I didn't respond. Just turned and walked out of the house. I didn't slam the door. Didn't run. I walked back across the lawn like nothing happened, my heart pounding in my ears. I locked my front door and stood behind the curtain, staring at Martha's house. Nothing moved. The curtains stayed drawn. I waited there for a long time, not knowing what to do. The woman in the cat costume crawled toward me slowly, her palms and knees pressing into the carpet with the practiced smoothness of someone who had done it 1,000 times. She rubbed her head gently against my shin, letting out soft, rhythmic meows. I didn't move. She looked up at me, her painted-on whiskers slightly smudged, her expression vacant but calm, like a content house cat. I could smell her breath. Tuna. The man in the dog costume let out a bark, sat upright, and started panting, tongue out, his eyes locked on mine. His rubber tail wagged from side to side with mechanical precision. I'm just here to check in, I managed to say. Pet sitting for Martha. The Catwoman purred, then turned her head and pointed with her nose toward a laminated schedule taped neatly to the wall. I took a few slow steps closer to read it. The feeding chart was color-coded, organized by names and days of the week. Whiskers, 8 a.m. Wet food, noon grooming, 6 p.m. dry food with supplement. Rex, walk at 9 a.m., bath on Sundays. Snowball, carrot treats, daily brushing. Rusty, exercise in the backyard, peanut butter snacks. It was all there. Meals, naps, even litter box training for one of them. The list was so long the chart stretched down almost to the floor. They weren't playing a joke. This wasn't a party. These 4 adults lived here as animals, full time. I stepped back. The dog man tilted his head. Treat, he said, lifting one paw slowly into the air like he was trained to. No, I think I need to go. My voice came out thinner than I wanted. No one moved to stop me. They just watched, staying in their roles, even as I backed out of the room and turned the corner toward the door. I heard a low, disappointed whimper as I slipped out and shut it behind me. I locked my car as soon as I got in, even though I was in her driveway. My hands were shaking. I stared at the dashboard for a long time, the key resting in the ignition, not turning it. I didn't even know what I'd just witnessed. I hadn't seen chains or cages or anything clearly abusive, just adults willingly living like this. I started the car, drove back to my place, and didn't unpack the bag I'd brought. That night, I ignored 3 calls from an unknown number. The 4th time I answered. It was Martha. I just wanted to see how my little ones were doing, she said sweetly. They like you, you know. Whiskers never warms up to anyone that fast. They're fine, I said, my mouth dry. But I'm sorry. Something's come up with my brother. I need to head out of town tomorrow. I don't think I can come by again. Oh, that's terrible, she said, her voice full of real sympathy. I hate to ask, but do you know anyone else who might be good with animals? Most people, well, they don't really understand us. I didn't know how to answer that. I gave a vague maybe and told her I'd ask around. She thanked me, reminded me where the spare key was in case I changed my mind, and hung up. That was it. Like we were talking about actual cats and dogs. The next day, I stayed home. No part of me wanted to drive by her house. I didn't want to risk seeing any of them again, crawling in the yard or barking behind curtains. That evening, I saw her car pull into the driveway and watched from behind the blinds as she carried in 2 large bags and a new scratching post. Later, she knocked on my door with a Tupperware of cookies. Her smile was warm, grandmotherly. She said she wanted to properly thank me for stepping in. "You should come over for dinner next weekend," she said. "They'd love to spend time with you. You only saw them during feeding hours. They're really quite funny in the evenings. Rusty does this thing with a ball you wouldn't believe." I told her I had plans, but maybe another time. She nodded politely, but I could tell she thought I was missing out. Every couple days after that, she waved at me from her porch or mentioned how much the babies missed me. I never responded directly. I just smiled, kept walking, didn't stop to chat anymore. I couldn't. There was nothing to say. I never saw any of them leave the house. Not once. But the deliveries kept coming. Bulk boxes from pet companies, Amazon orders with chew toys, shampoos, grooming clippers. On weekends, I'd hear odd sounds drifting through the fence. A high-pitched yipping laugh, soft meowing. At one point I thought I heard someone singing a lullaby, but when I leaned closer to the window, it had stopped. I thought about reporting it once, but what would I even say? No one seemed in distress. They were clean, fed, docile. I didn't have names, only nicknames from a chore list. And as twisted as it felt, I wasn't sure it was even illegal. So I waited, kept to myself, finished my lease. The day I moved out, I loaded my car early and didn't say goodbye. I drove past her house without slowing down, her curtains drawn as usual. One of them might have been watching from behind the glass, but I didn't look. Now and then I wonder if she's still there, in that same routine. Morning feedings, walks around the backyard, grooming schedules and rubber tails. If she found someone else to pet sit. If they ever broke character. If they even remember how to live as anything else. I never gave anyone my forwarding address, just in case. When I was 18 and finishing senior year, I noticed this weird guy hanging around our school. He was tall, maybe in his 30s, and always wearing the same worn-out army jacket. The first time anyone mentioned him was when Brad, my friend, saw him during lunch. He pointed him out, standing by the fence near the athletic field, just standing there with his hands in his pockets, not doing anything, just staring. Brad joked that he looked like some creeper scoping out high school girls, but I figured he was just some local weirdo, maybe homeless, or just mentally off. Our school was near a bus stop and a grocery store, so random people did walk by a lot. Still, something about how often I started seeing him felt off. Over the next week, I'd catch him there again. Same time, same place. Sometimes during lunch, sometimes during my last period, standing still, eyes fixed toward the school like he was waiting for something or someone. He never stepped on the campus, just kept to the sidewalk. Always alone. Always the jacket. It got to the point where I'd catch myself looking out the window to check for him. A couple teachers mentioned something during class once. One said, "If anyone's bothering you outside school grounds, tell security." Nobody said his name. I didn't even know if he was actually dangerous, but he was definitely consistent. And the staring didn't feel casual anymore. It felt like watching. Waiting. Brad and I started calling him Army Jacket Guy. One day, we walked past the fence on our way back from 7-Eleven and passed maybe 30 feet from where he stood. He didn't move, didn't blink. Just turned his head as we passed and followed us with his eyes like a surveillance camera. "Creepy as hell," Brad said. I tried to laugh it off, but I felt it too. That quiet kind of danger. Like a predator pretending to be harmless until the moment he's not. I thought about telling a teacher, but what could I say? Some guy standing on public sidewalk watching students? It wasn't illegal, just weird. So, I kept an eye on him, but I didn't do anything. That Friday night, both my parents were on call at the hospital. They're nurses, and sometimes their schedules line up badly, which leaves me home alone. I didn't mind. I had a final for biology coming up, so I planned to spend the night studying. I made a sandwich, cracked open a Red Bull, and sat at the dining table with my notes spread out. Around 9 p.m., I heard the back gate creak open. Not loud, but clear in the quiet of the house. The sound of old metal moving. At first, I assumed it was the wind, or maybe our neighbor grabbing a ball from our yard. We lived in a quiet cul-de-sac where people were always borrowing things. Garden hoses, hedge trimmers, whatever. But something felt wrong. Rex, the neighbor's golden retriever, started barking like crazy. Not just a bark at a squirrel, full-throated, angry barking like someone was in his territory. I stood up and turned off the music I had playing. Walked to the back window. The garden gate was wide open. The latch wasn't just undone, it was bent. The top hinge hung twisted, and the bottom part of the gate dragged in the grass like it had been pulled hard, then forced back into place. I stepped outside and looked closer. The metal was warped like someone had used a crowbar or something. I glanced at the side fence that separated our backyard from Rex's. He was still barking, snapping his teeth at the wood slats, clawing the bottom. His owner, an older guy named Tom, stepped out on his porch and called for him. I waved and said, "Everything okay?" But Tom didn't hear me. He just grabbed Rex's collar and dragged him inside. The barking didn't stop until the door shut behind them. I walked back inside and called my dad. No answer. Then I tried my mom. Straight to voicemail. I checked all the windows, double-locked the front and back doors, pulled the curtains tight and grabbed the wooden bat from my closet. It was dumb, but it made me feel better. I sat back at the table and tried to focus, but I kept glancing at the back door, like I expected it to open on its own. I told myself it was probably just kids screwing around. Maybe someone lost a ball. Maybe a storm had weakened the hinges. I tried to believe it. I kept thinking about Army Jacket Guy. He'd never followed anyone. Never even left his spot by the sidewalk. Still, it bothered me. The gate didn't open itself, and the latch didn't bend from wind. Someone had come into our yard. They hadn't taken anything, but they'd gotten in, and I didn't know why. Around 2 a.m., I was still at my computer when a bright light flashed across my bedroom window. It wasn't just a flicker from passing cars. This was a direct, controlled beam moving with intent. I froze. Someone was outside, pointing a flashlight up into my room from the backyard. I killed the lamp next to me and dropped down to the floor, crawling to the side of my bed. Slowly, I peeked through the edge of the blinds. There he was, the man from school. Same army jacket, same blank expression. He was standing directly below my window, slowly panning the light across the second story. He moved methodically, scanning each window like he was studying the structure, taking mental notes. When the light hit my window again, I jerked back and ducked lower, holding my breath. I waited, listening. No footsteps, no talking. Just silence outside, and the faint sound of leaves shifting in the wind. I risked another look. He was walking along the side of the house now, pointing the beam into each ground floor window, lingering on the kitchen and living room. His movements were calm, not rushed. Like he'd done this before. Like he knew what he was doing. Every time the light swept past, I dropped lower behind furniture or walls. He circled the entire house, even checked the small basement window we barely used. Then he disappeared into the shadows again. I crawled to my bed, grabbed my phone from the charger, and whispered into the speaker as I dialed the neighborhood patrol number taped to the side of my nightstand. A sleepy voice answered, and I gave my address in a hushed panic. "There's someone in my yard. He's checking my windows. He was at my school this week, just watching. Now he's here." The dispatcher told me to stay away from the windows and said a guard would be there in less than 10 minutes. I kept low and crept down the hallway, checking every door lock as I passed. At the living room, I pulled back one side of the curtain just an inch and watched. He was still out there, still walking, still checking. He tried the front door handle, pulled it slowly, like he was testing whether someone had forgotten to lock it. Then he stepped back and stared at the house like he was thinking through his next move. I saw headlights approach from the corner of the street. A white SUV with the neighborhood patrol emblem turned slowly toward our cul-de-sac. The man reacted instantly. He didn't run or panic. He just stepped calmly into the darkness between our house and the neighbors, vanishing like he'd practiced this. The patrol SUV stopped, and a uniformed guard got out with a flashlight. He scanned the sidewalk, then our lawn, then tapped lightly on the front door. I opened it with the chain still on. My voice was shaking as I told him what happened. He walked the perimeter, checked the yard, shined his light around the back where the gate was still broken, but didn't find anyone. "Probably just someone passing through," he said. "We'll do a few extra passes this week." He scribbled notes into a small pad and got back into his SUV. I watched the taillights vanish around the corner, then turned every light in the house back on and sat in the kitchen holding the knife from the drawer. I stayed like that until the sky began to brighten. My parents came home around 6 a.m. My dad stepped into the kitchen first, stopping when he saw me still awake, hunched at the table with the knife clenched in my hand. My mom came in right after, confused and worried. I didn't wait for questions. I stood up and told them everything. About the man, about the flashlight, the broken gate, the windows, the front door handle. I showed them the latch, bent clean in half like someone used a crowbar. I showed them where he stood under my window. My dad didn't speak for a full minute. Then he picked up the phone and called the police. An officer came out an hour later, just as the sun was fully up. He walked the property with my dad, took a statement, and noted the damage to the gate. But he said since the guy hadn't entered the house or physically harmed anyone, there wasn't much they could charge him with. "It's technically trespassing and vandalism," he said. "But unless you can identify him or have footage, we can't do more than file a report." That same weekend, we got a full security system installed. Cameras at every entrance, motion lights that lit up the whole yard like a stadium, door sensors. My dad even added reinforced locks to the windows. We went from barely locking our back gate to living in a fortress. Every beep, every creak of wood, every flicker from the cameras set me on edge for weeks after. I barely slept in my own room, often staying on the couch in the middle of the house, where I could see the front and back doors at the same time. The man never came back. Not to the house, not to school, not anywhere I could see. But I kept looking. I'd scan every face in crowds. Check the rearview mirror twice at every red light. Even in public places, I'd find myself glancing over my shoulder or checking reflective windows for someone standing behind me. I became aware of every car that drove slowly past our block. Every time a delivery driver stepped onto our lawn, my heart kicked up like I was back in that room, staring down at a flashlight beam. Eventually, the fear settled into something quieter. Not gone, just buried deep, like a bone under a floorboard. The police never called back. The cameras never caught anything more than raccoons and delivery vans. And school ended a few weeks later. Graduation came. Summer passed. Life moved forward. But I never stopped locking everything. Not once. I never left windows cracked, even on hot nights. I still don't. Because that night, if I had fallen asleep, if I had left the door unlocked, if the security guard had shown up just a little later, things could have ended differently. And nobody would have believed me until it was too late. Eight years ago, I was driving cross-country with my 12-year-old son, Tyler. It was a rush trip. No goodbye parties, no long goodbyes. Just packed bags, a dusty old Civic, and a vague plan to get to my sister's place 3 states over. My ex-husband had started making serious threats. Stuff like, "If you don't come back, I'll take him, and you'll never see him again." I didn't think he'd actually do it. Not until I saw him waiting outside Tyler's school 2 days in a row. So I pulled him out early, grabbed what I could, and we started driving west. That night, sometime after midnight, we were on a deserted stretch of highway, somewhere in Colorado or maybe Utah. I don't know exactly. The signs had been sparse. We were low on gas, and my phone's GPS had lost signal hours earlier. I kept thinking I'd see a lit-up town, or even one of those 24-hour truck stops, but it was just dark road and flat land all around us. Finally, a flickering neon sign appeared in the distance. Gas. Food. Lodge. The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the early 80s. A single pump stood under a cracked metal awning, and next to it was a squat building that could have been a diner once, but now looked abandoned. Behind it was a little office labeled Motel, with half the letters burned out. I pulled in next to the pump. There were no other cars in sight. Tyler stayed buckled in, watching something on the tablet, while I stepped out and tried to insert my card. The screen was dead. No response. I was about to go into the office when a guy stepped out from around the side of the building. He was wearing a security company uniform, gray button-up, black slacks, and a patch that said Presidium. That alone felt weird. What gas station needs private security out here? He walked up slow, hands in his pockets, and greeted me like we were old friends. "Long drive tonight, huh?" he said. "You folks headed far?" "Just passing through," I said, keeping it short. "Yeah, not much out this way?" "Been on the road a while?" I nodded without elaborating, hoping he'd move along, but he lingered. I kept my eyes on the pump as he circled around the front of the car and looked inside. "That your son?" he asked. I just nodded again, not liking how closely he was peering in. He looked back at me and smiled. "You know, this stretch can get dicey at night. Lots of deer. Long hauls like this, easy to doze off behind the wheel." I just kept pumping. "You staying anywhere nearby?" "We're good," I said, not wanting to get into it. He chuckled, then said, "Tire looks a little low on the back there. Want me to check it for you? Got a gauge?" "No, I'm okay," I said, but he was already crouching by the rear wheel, pulling a small pressure tool from his belt. I watched as he checked the tire, then moved slowly along the back of the car, eyes scanning through the back window. "Nice luggage," he said. "Lot of people pass through here on vacation, but not this late. You guys driving straight through the night?" I didn't answer. I just moved around the car and pulled the pump out. Tyler had paused his video and was glancing between me and the man. He stood up and dusted off his hands. "I'd suggest getting some rest. Driving tired's no joke, especially with a kid in the car. Lucky for you, we've got a little room in the back. Nothing fancy, but private and real quiet. $20 cash, no forms, no fuss." I said we were fine. He gave me a look like he didn't believe me, then leaned a little closer and said, "Just safer." That's all. You never know who's out on these roads. I didn't respond. I could feel Tyler watching us, tense. I finished fueling, replaced the cap, and walked around to the driver's side. The man stepped back, giving me room, but he didn't walk away. "You sure?" he said again. "Place is safe. You'd have your own key. I don't even tell the front desk we use it." That last part made my stomach turn. I told him again we were fine, and climbed into the car. Tyler didn't say anything, but I could tell he wanted to ask what was going on. As I started the engine, the man leaned slightly toward my window. People think bad stuff only happens in cities. But out here, no one hears a thing. I pulled away without looking back. He kept circling the car like a hawk, smiling but not stepping back. "That room's got clean sheets, a microwave, little fridge, everything you'd need," he said, as if we were having a casual chat. "Plenty of families stop here and crash for a few hours, safer than pushing through the night." He leaned on the roof of the car, looking in at Tyler, especially with a kid. I could see my son shrinking into his seat, clutching his backpack. "I said we're fine," I repeated. My voice was sharper this time, but the guy didn't flinch. Instead, he looked at the gas gauge on my dash, then glanced at my rear tires again like he was still evaluating something. "What time you planning to roll into town?" he asked. "You got a long way left?" That stopped me for a second. It wasn't casual curiosity. He was collecting details, trying to figure out how long we'd be on the road, when we'd be alone again, maybe even when someone might notice we were missing. I avoided the question and told Tyler to get buckled. The man stepped closer to the back door. "What's your name, little man?" he asked. "You 12? 13? I stepped between them before Tyler could respond. "We're leaving now." That's when I got a good look at his shirt again. Something was off. The patch on his chest said Presidium, but the name tag pinned under it was from a completely different company, Guardian Secure. That didn't make sense. I didn't say anything about it, but I knew right then I wasn't dealing with a real employee. I pulled my phone from my pocket and turned my back to him. "Hey babe, yeah, we just fueled up. We're at mile marker 47, I said loudly. "Yeah, should be at Steve's by 3. I'll call Officer Johnson when we pull in, let him know we made it." It was all fake. There was no husband, no Steve, no Officer Johnson. But the second I said that name, the guy's posture changed. He straightened up, hands out of his pockets, and stopped smiling. He didn't say anything else, just turned and walked back toward the station's office. I opened the back door and told Tyler to get in, fast. He didn't ask questions. I slid into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and pulled out without waiting for the pump to finish its shutdown cycle. I checked the rearview mirror 3 times before we even hit the highway. He never came back out. An hour later, I found a truck stop with bright floodlights, parked in view of a security camera, and made a real call. This time to my brother in Arizona. I told him everything. The gas station, the guy's questions, the weird badge. He said I was lucky I left and told me to file a report. The next day I gave everything to the state police. Description of the man, the mismatched uniform, even the mile marker where the station sat. They took it seriously, or at least they said they would. I never heard anything after that. It was 2 years later, a random Saturday, when Tyler came running into the living room with his laptop. He was shaking, not scared, just wide-eyed. "Mom," he said, "you have to read this." It was a news article, short, buried on a regional site. That exact gas station had been shut down by federal investigators. There was a whole operation behind it. robberies targeting families driving late at night. The attendants weren't real employees. They were scouts. They'd ask where people were going, who they were with, what kind of gear they had. If they thought the travelers had cash or valuables, they'd offer a back room to rest. Once the victims were asleep, the scouts would alert accomplices. Sometimes people were robbed at the station. Sometimes they were followed and hit later, miles down the road. The report didn't give names, just that there were multiple suspects, some still under investigation. I never found out who the man was that night or what happened to him. But I saved the article. I printed it and filed it away with the police report I'd submitted years earlier. Tyler doesn't ask about the details anymore. But sometimes, on long drives, he still glances out the window a little more than he used to. He doesn't like dark roads, and neither do I. We both remember how close that night came to ending differently. We remember how fast it went from creepy to dangerous. And when I think back to that empty highway, that run-down gas station, and that man with 2 name tags, I know exactly what would have happened if I'd said yes. I was working as a delivery driver in suburban Chicago about 5 years ago, mostly doing late-night restaurant orders. The job paid decent money, but meant driving through sketchy industrial areas after midnight. I didn't mind it most nights. Less traffic, fewer cops, and no customers trying to guilt-trip you for forgetting extra soy sauce packets. It was quiet work. Just me, a bunch of styrofoam containers, and my beat-up Honda Civic with 240,000 miles, and a cracked windshield I never bothered fixing. One night in September, around 2:30 a.m., I was on my way home after a double shift. The car had been acting up all day, shaky idle, sluggish acceleration, but I pushed it anyway. I just dropped off an order in Cicero and was cutting through a warehouse district to save a few minutes. There were no streetlights, just long stretches of cracked pavement, chain-link fences, and graffiti-tagged loading bays. I remember passing a row of abandoned brick warehouses when I heard a grinding noise under the hood. Then the engine started sputtering, and the power steering went out. I managed to coast into a wide gravel lot next to one of the boarded-up buildings before the car died completely. No cars, no lights, no sound. Just that dead industrial quiet that hangs in the air after dark. I called for a tow, and the dispatcher said it would take at least an hour. I cracked my window and leaned back in my seat. I figured I'd just sit tight, maybe scroll my phone until they showed up. But then, maybe 15 minutes later, I saw headlights coming from the direction I had just driven. A white van, no windows on the side. It didn't slow as it approached, just turned sharply into the gravel lot and pulled up about 50 yards away from me. No logos, just solid white. The kind of van people joke about when they talk about kidnappers or weirdos. I watched through my side mirror as the van idled for a few seconds before the driver shut it off and 3 guys got out. They moved like they were in a hurry, one slamming the driver's door hard enough to echo off the warehouse walls. All 3 were wearing dark hoodies and cargo pants, and they immediately went around to the back doors. They opened them, and I saw them wrestling with something large, maybe 6 feet long, wrapped in dark plastic or canvas. Whatever it was, it took all 3 of them to handle it. They kept shifting their grip and swearing, like it was awkward to carry. I ducked down a little in my seat and turned off my phone screen so it wouldn't glow. The light from the van's headlights lit up the side of the warehouse, and I could see the guy closest to me looking around as if checking if anyone was watching. They didn't notice my car, or maybe they thought it was empty. It was backed into the shadows at the edge of the lot. I watched them through the driver's side mirror as they started dragging the bundle toward a rusted loading dock. One of them had bolt cutters, which he used to snap the thick chain hanging from the warehouse's back door. The clatter of the chain hitting the metal ramp cut through the silence. Then one of the men pulled open the dock door, and I caught a whiff of something sharp and chemical in the air. Bleach mostly, but under it, something sour, something rotted. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just watched them from behind the glass. They disappeared into the building with the bundle, leaving the van doors hanging open. A few seconds later, their voices carried back out into the night. Low, nervous tones. Arguing. I couldn't make out everything, just a few words here and there. Lift the tarp. Don't drop it again. We should have burned it. Then one of them said something that made my blood run cold. Check the floor. Make sure the drain's clear. I stayed completely still, heart pounding in my ears. There was a noise like something being dragged across concrete. Then another voice, sharper, said, "Hey, get the gloves. He's leaking." I slid lower in the seat, carefully pulling the door lock switch just to make sure it was engaged. I couldn't risk turning on the car for heat. I didn't want any lights or noise. My hands were shaking. Every few seconds I peeked at the van, still idling in the gravel, headlights pointed toward the loading dock. Then I saw movement. One of them came out, walking quickly back to the van. He grabbed something from the front passenger seat. A roll of duct tape and what looked like a tarp or blanket. The guy paused, looked around, then headed back inside. The smell got stronger for a second as the warehouse door hung open. I almost gagged. There was definitely something decaying in there. Something more than just bleach and mold. They were inside for maybe 10 more minutes. Then the three of them came back out, moving faster this time. They were wiping their hands with what looked like rags. One of them tossed a pair of gloves into a black trash bag and tied it shut. One guy said, "Get the gas." And I watched another open a metal toolbox in the back of the van and pull out a red plastic gas can. I ducked down again completely, pressing myself flat across the seats. Through the mirror, I saw them go back into the warehouse with the gas can. I heard a splash, then the sound of sloshing liquid hitting the floor. One guy coughed and yelled something I couldn't make out. A few seconds later, the flick of a lighter. That's when I saw the flash of light inside the warehouse, and smoke begin to rise through the broken windows. The shortest guy was barking orders like he was used to being obeyed. His voice cut through the night, sharp and clipped. "Hurry up," he said. "Get it deep inside where nobody looks." The other two didn't argue, just moved faster, shoulders hunched, glancing over their backs like they expected someone to be watching. One of them fumbled a flashlight, and it clattered on the concrete. "Quiet, man," the short one snapped. "Jesus." Then I heard him say a name. Carter. He said it twice, followed by what sounded like a phone number. He repeated both things again, slower this time, like he was drilling it into their heads. "Carter. 4129. Say it back to me." One of the others repeated the number. The short guy nodded and said, "Good." "You forget that. We're screwed." That name stuck in my head. I hadn't thought about it in a few days, but I remembered now. Michael Carter. Local guy. Owned a mechanic shop and a second-hand appliance store. I'd seen his face on a gas station flyer a week ago. Missing 3 weeks now. Rumors were going around about gambling debts, bad people. And now here I was in the dark with 3 men dumping something heavy wrapped in canvas, saying his name. I reached for my phone without thinking, turned on the voice recorder, trying to point it in the direction of the building. I couldn't hear much, just muffled voices and a bang like someone kicking something metal. They were too far inside. My hand was shaking. I thought about stepping out to get closer but didn't move. I knew better. I wasn't a hero. Eventually the voices got quieter, then disappeared completely. Smoke kept curling from the upper windows of the warehouse. Something was definitely burning. I stayed crouched low in my car, barely breathing. After about 20 minutes, they came back out. Their bundle was gone. They walked lighter now, like a burden had been dropped. One of them had a large white bucket and was spreading some kind of powder in a circle around the loading dock. The smell got stronger, sharp, bitter, like chemicals mixed with wet concrete. I guessed it was lime or something like it. The shorter guy kicked some of the powder into the air and checked the ground near the warehouse door. "Get the rest back in," he said. The other two loaded plastic containers into the van, clean ones now. No canvas, no bundles, just boxes that looked freshly rinsed. I stayed low as they slammed the doors shut and climbed back into the van. The engine started. They backed out slow, scanning the lot with their headlights. My car must have looked empty from where they were. Maybe they assumed it was abandoned like everything else in that area. Their headlights swept past me, and then they pulled out of the lot and headed back the way they came. I didn't move until their taillights vanished completely. Then I sat there for another 5 minutes, making sure they weren't coming back. My hands were still shaking when I got out. I left the car without even locking it. I didn't care anymore. I just walked, fast but not running, heading east toward the closest road with lights. It took me about 40 minutes to reach a gas station. The clerk looked at me sideways when I walked in, sweaty, dusty, hands still smelling like grease. I bought a bottle of water, used the bathroom to wash my face, then called a friend. I told him my car broke down and I needed a ride. I didn't mention the van. Didn't mention Carter. I didn't even say what road I'd broken down on. Just gave the address of the gas station and waited outside under the humming sign. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I looked up Michael Carter online. His photo popped up immediately. 48 years old. Owned 2 small businesses. Wife said he went out to meet someone about a loan and never came back. The photo was older than what I saw on the flyer. In it, he was smiling, holding a dog. I stared at it for a long time. All day I wrestled with what to do. If I told the cops, how would I explain it? What if those men had friends in the department? What if they saw my face and came looking for me? I barely slept that night, just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, phone in my hand. The next morning I woke up and knew I couldn't sit on it. I called the police department's tip line from a payphone at a laundromat. I kept my voice low, gave them the exact location of the warehouse, even described the gravel lot, the broken chain, the dock door. I said they needed to search the place, said it might be connected to Michael Carter. I didn't say my name. I didn't say how I knew. Then I hung up. A week later, the story broke. Human remains were found in a warehouse off Roosevelt Industrial Drive. A local man's body. They didn't say his name in the first article, but by the next day, it was out. Michael Carter. Police arrested 3 men connected to a loan sharking ring that had been targeting small business owners. They were tied to 2 other disappearances going back over a year. The picture they ran of Carter was the same one I saw online. They said he'd been missing 25 days when they found him. I didn't read past that. I couldn't. I quit my delivery job that week, moved across town and deleted all my social media. I even changed my phone number. Paranoid? Maybe. But sometimes I see a white van out of the corner of my eye and my stomach still drops. I haven't driven past that warehouse since. Never will. There are some things you don't talk about, not to anyone. You just carry them. Like cargo. When I was 16, I was home alone on a Thursday afternoon, trying to get through a stack of algebra problems for a test the next morning. It was around 4 when I heard the front door open. Not a knock, not a creak. An actual key turning and the sound of it swinging wide. My first thought was that Jake was home early. He's my younger brother, 13 at the time, and he usually didn't get back from basketball practice until after 6. But whatever, I figured maybe practice got canceled or something. I was in my room upstairs, sitting at my desk by the window, and I shouted down, "Yo, that you?" But didn't hear anything back. I waited a second, then shrugged, and went back to working out a slope-intercept equation. The house made noises sometimes anyway, little settling sounds. Plus, if it was Jake, he'd be in the kitchen rummaging for snacks or already glued to the Xbox in the living room. I didn't think twice. Maybe 10 minutes later, I heard a thud from downstairs, like something heavy had been dropped. Not loud enough to be alarming, but just sharp enough to catch my attention. I paused, listened, didn't hear anything else. Probably Jake dropping his backpack or kicking off his shoes. Still, I called out again, louder this time. "Jake?" No answer. I waited. Still nothing. I stood up, walked to the top of the stairs, and leaned over the railing. The hallway down there was visible, but empty. I listened hard. No footsteps, no voice. The quiet felt heavier than usual, but I pushed the thought aside. I went back into my room and tried to focus again. I figured Jake had his headphones on, or he just wasn't in the mood to talk. Not weird. For the next hour, I stayed glued to my textbook, flipping between practice questions and a YouTube playlist. I didn't hear anything else that stood out. Just the occasional creak from the floorboards or the fridge clicking on in the kitchen. I was in that zoned-out mode you get when you're buried in study stress. I didn't notice the time until my phone buzzed next to me. It was 5:12. Mom was calling. I answered and immediately she said, "Hey, just a heads up. I'm picking Jake up from practice right now. They added an extra training for regionals." I didn't respond right away. "Wait, what?" "Yeah, I'm just at the school now," she said. "Jake's not here," I told her. My voice sounded flat in my own ears. There was a pause on her end. "What do you mean?" I stood up so fast my chair rolled back and hit the wall. "I thought he was already home. I heard the door open, like an hour ago." Mom's voice dropped. "Is the door locked?" I didn't answer. I was already walking out of my room. I crept out into the upstairs hallway, every step light. The carpet muffled the sound, but I moved slow anyway. I hung up without another word. My fingers gripped the banister at the top of the stairs. The light from the hallway window was fading, the kind of gray-blue you get before the sun fully dips. I leaned out just a bit to listen. The house was dead silent. Then, from somewhere deep under me, maybe near the laundry room or the storage area in the basement, I heard a soft, dragging sound, like something scraping slowly over concrete. My heart was pounding now, hard and fast. I backed away from the banister. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. I checked my door. It didn't have a lock. My room felt too open, too exposed. I looked at the hallway bathroom across from me. It had a lock, but no way out. I walked back into my room and looked out the window. We were on the second floor. Too far to jump. I took out my phone again, moved to the corner of the room away from the window, and dialed 911, but stopped before hitting the call button. What if they were just in the basement, hadn't heard me yet? If I called, would the sound tip them off? I lowered the phone and crouched, trying to make my breathing quiet. I could hear the faintest shuffle again, slow, irregular. Definitely not the water heater or any usual creak. This was movement. A person moving, not fast. Just steady, I had to know for sure where it was coming from. I inched back to the hallway and moved to the far end where the attic door was. The basement door was 2 flights below, just past the kitchen. I couldn't see it from where I stood. But if I opened my parents' room, I might be able to look out over the staircase without stepping into view. I twisted their doorknob slowly and eased the door open. I kept low as I crossed the room to the far corner, where their window gave me a partial view of the front porch. The porch light was off, but the door, it was slightly open, not wide, just cracked. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to remember if I had heard it close earlier. I didn't think I had. I just assumed it had. Then I heard it again. A soft bump, this time coming from directly below me. The basement staircase ended under this very room. I couldn't stay here. I turned and went back to my room, shut the door, and dragged my chair in front of it. It wouldn't stop someone determined, but it would give me a few seconds. I picked up my phone again and finally called 911. It rang once, then twice. Then, from downstairs, I heard a new sound. Footsteps. This time, definite. Coming up the basement stairs. I tiptoed down the stairs as quietly as possible, staying close to the wall where the steps didn't creak as much. I skipped the 3rd step from the top because I knew it groaned even when you stepped on it lightly. The hallway downstairs was dim. Only a sliver of light from the kitchen window illuminated the entryway. I kept my back against the wall, moving slow, 1 step at a time. When I reached the bottom, I paused. The basement door was wide open. We never left it that way. It swung gently, barely moving, but enough to catch my eye. The sounds were coming from down there. I could hear movement, something heavy being dragged, maybe a box across the concrete. Then a few distinct footsteps. Slow, uneven. I leaned forward just enough to peek around the corner. The light switch for the basement was off, and everything beyond the door was swallowed in black. I thought about calling out again but held back. If whoever was down there didn't know I was aware, maybe I could still avoid them. I slowly backed away from the basement door, not taking my eyes off it. My socks made almost no noise against the hardwood. I stepped backward across the living room, staying close to the wall, and moved toward the stairs again. My hand was shaking as I reached for the banister. When I finally got back upstairs, I didn't hesitate this time. I walked straight into my bedroom, closed the door, and locked it. Then I grabbed the desk chair and wedged it under the handle. It wasn't going to stop anyone for long, but it was better than nothing. I sat on the floor behind my bed trying to keep quiet, my phone in my hand. I checked the time, 5:19 p.m. I thought about calling the police, but what was I going to say? That I heard someone in the basement but never saw them? That the door was open and I got scared? Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was the plumber my mom mentioned needing to call last week. But that didn't make sense. Nobody would come into a house like that without saying anything. I decided to wait just a few more minutes. Maybe the person would leave. Maybe this would all just pass. 10 minutes went by. Then I heard the front door slam. Not softly either. It was a full-force, loud slam that made the walls vibrate slightly. I got up immediately and ran to my window. I pulled the curtain back just enough to see out onto the street. There was a man walking away from our house. Middle-aged, dark blue work pants and a gray shirt. He walked fast, not running, but with that hurried kind of stride like he didn't want to be seen but wasn't panicking. In his right hand, he held a dark bag, like a tool bag or small duffel. I didn't recognize him. He turned onto Maple Street and kept walking, not looking back once. I picked up my phone and called Mom. She answered immediately, and I told her everything. About the door, the noises, the man leaving. She hung up fast and said they were on their way. Less than 10 minutes later, both of my parents came rushing through the front door. My dad checked the basement with a flashlight while my mom called the police. They took it seriously. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes, asked me everything I remembered. I told them about the noises, the man, the bag. They asked if he looked familiar. I said no. One officer went into the basement with my dad and looked around. Nothing was broken. Nothing was clearly missing. But a few boxes had been pulled off the shelves and opened. Some of my dad's old tools were moved around. The front door, my mom explained to them, had a busted handle that was supposed to be fixed that day. A locksmith had been scheduled for the afternoon, and my parents had left the door unlocked for him. But he never showed. Turns out he had rescheduled the appointment that morning, but the message didn't go through because of a typo in the email address. My mom only found that out when she called the company again later. The man must have noticed the door was unlocked and took the chance. Maybe he had been watching the neighborhood. Maybe he just got lucky. The officers took a report, wrote down everything, said they'd check nearby security cameras on the street. But after that night, we never heard anything else. They didn't catch him. Nothing major was stolen. Just a few tools, maybe, or small stuff we never noticed. I still think about it sometimes. The open door, the dragging noise, the fact that he was just 1 floor below me while I sat in my room thinking it was my brother coming home early. I still get nervous when I'm alone. I don't relax until I've checked every door and every window. I lock the basement door every single time I walk past it. And I never assume it's just the house making noise anymore. So when I was 19, my college buddies Michael, David, and I decided to spend the weekend at Michael's family house, about an hour outside town. His folks own this place way out near the woods, not really in the middle of nowhere, but still pretty isolated. No one else lived on that stretch of road, just big trees and fields. Saturday night we got bored and figured we'd drive around looking for abandoned buildings or any weird places to check out. There was a lot of back roads and farm property out that way, and we were just driving slowly with the windows down, playing music low, scanning the dark woods for anything out of the ordinary. It was probably close to 11 p.m. when we saw something weird up ahead. The road curved, and we spotted headlights off in the trees. At first we thought it was someone parked, maybe hooking up or just taking a break. But when we got closer, we realized the vehicle had gone off the road and crashed into a tree. It was an old Chevy pickup, kind of rusty, front end smashed up pretty bad, hood bent open a little. What freaked us out was the fact that the engine was still running and the headlights were on, beaming into the trees like it had just happened. But there was nobody inside. We stopped a few feet behind it and just sat there for a second with the engine idling. No movement anywhere. It was so quiet, just the soft hum of that old truck and some insects buzzing in the fields. We all got out and walked over slowly. The front bumper was pushed in and there were leaves and bark stuck around the fender. The driver's door was open, not all the way, but hanging ajar like someone had jumped out in a hurry. There was no blood that we could see, no broken glass on the ground. The windshield had a big spiderweb crack in the corner, but that was it. We started calling out, thinking maybe someone got hurt and ran into the woods or was lying nearby. We fanned out a little, checking both sides of the road and the tree line. I had my phone flashlight out and was scanning the ditch and grass. Nothing. The air smelled like oil and something sharp, like hot metal. David stood by the truck and shouted a few more times, "Hello? Anybody need help?" But the only answer was the engine ticking and a cicada buzz. It was getting really strange. Michael climbed up into the cab, careful not to touch too much. The seat was pushed back, like a tall guy had been driving. The keys were still in the ignition. On the back seat was this huge red duffel bag, and next to it a cardboard box with some papers spilling out. It looked like a mix of envelopes, files, and maybe receipts. I told him not to touch anything just in case we were dealing with something serious. David said we should call the police right now, that someone could be hurt, or maybe this was some kind of crime scene. But Michael disagreed. He said maybe the driver was drunk and ran off to avoid getting arrested, or maybe they were nearby and scared. He wanted to check around a little more before involving the cops. "Just give it 10 minutes," he said. "Let's make sure no one's bleeding out in the woods." I hesitated but didn't argue. David was clearly uncomfortable. He stood near the truck, arms crossed, while I followed Michael into the ditch on the passenger side, shining my phone light around. There were some scuff marks in the dirt, like someone had walked there, but nothing else. Meanwhile, Tyler had climbed into the truck and started going through the box in the back seat. He pulled out some documents and held them up to the dome light. I came around and asked what he was doing. He said, "This isn't just junk mail. These are insurance forms and invoices. Looks like business stuff." He held up something that looked like a title or a bill of sale. I told him again we shouldn't be touching anything. He nodded but didn't stop flipping through the papers. David walked back toward us, more annoyed than scared at that point, and said again that we should just call the police. He had a point. Something about the whole thing felt off. The car was too fresh. If it had crashed hours ago, the engine would be cold by now. I checked the hood again, and you could feel the heat radiating from it. Whatever happened, it had to have been maybe 15-20 minutes before we found it. That made me uneasy. We weren't far behind whoever was driving. Michael motioned toward the woods behind the crash site and said we should check that way, just for a minute. I followed him, staying close to the road but scanning the dark with my flashlight. The trees were dense, thick brush and low-hanging branches. We walked about 50 feet in, crunching leaves and sticks underfoot, and still saw nothing. No blood, no clothes, no movement. I started to feel like we were being watched. Back at the truck, Tyler was still sitting inside, now going through the duffel bag. I saw him unzip it all the way and lean back like he was surprised. "Guys," he said, "come look at this." We came up behind him and looked inside. The bag was full of cash. Bundles of it, wrapped in rubber bands, stacked in neat piles. 10s, 20s, maybe 50s. I don't know how much was there, but it was definitely a lot. Thousands, maybe more. We all stood there in silence, just staring at it. David took a step back and said, "That's it. I'm calling the cops." Michael grabbed his arm and said, Wait. This is something big. Something serious. If we call the cops now, they're gonna think we stole this. We shouldn't even be here." David shook his head and said, "We didn't steal anything. We found a crashed truck with nobody in it and a bag of money. This is how people end up dead. I'm not messing around with this." I agreed with David. Something about the whole setup felt wrong, like we'd stumbled into something we weren't supposed to see. I looked at the trees again and suddenly felt very exposed. Tyler was still sitting there, holding one of the stacks in his hand, flipping through the bills like he couldn't believe they were real. Then he froze. "Someone's coming," he whispered. We all turned toward the road. We spent about 15 minutes searching the immediate area with our phone flashlights, walking in widening circles from the truck. The woods were quiet, just the crunch of leaves and distant hum of the running engine behind us. The ground was soft in places, but we didn't find any clear footprints or broken branches. No signs of a person hiding, no dropped items or blood. It was like the driver had just vanished into the trees, or maybe was never there at all. The weirdest part was how fresh it all felt. The heat from the hood, the way the lights were still bright. It didn't feel like something left sitting for hours. When we got back to the road, Tyler was already standing near our car, leaning against the hood with his arms crossed like nothing was wrong. He didn't mention the bag or the documents, and we didn't ask. The duffel bag was zipped up and still in the truck. We all just stood there for a minute, glancing at each other. Michael pulled out his phone and called 911. He kept the explanation simple. Crashed vehicle, no driver in sight, engine still running. They told us to wait there until someone arrived. 20 minutes later, a county patrol car rolled up. 2 officers stepped out, one older guy and one younger. They asked for our IDs and started taking notes as we explained how we found the truck. David did most of the talking. I noticed they didn't ask many follow-up questions. They spent a lot of time looking inside the truck and shining their flashlights around the wheels and under the body. The younger officer said quietly to the other that the plates were gone, both front and back. Just clean metal brackets where they should have been. No registration sticker in the window either. The officers thanked us, said they'd take it from here, and told us we could head out. That was it. No real questions about the bag or the documents. No curiosity about what we might have seen. As we pulled away, I looked back through the rear window. One officer was already on the radio. The other was reaching into the cab and turning off the ignition. It all felt unfinished. We barely spoke on the drive home. Even Tyler, who usually couldn't shut up, just stared out the window the whole ride. Michael dropped us off and said nothing besides later as we got out. I went inside and stayed up for hours in bed, scrolling through Reddit, checking local news, trying to find any mention of the crash. Nothing came up. The next morning, Michael called and asked me to come over. When I got there, he and Tyler were already out back by the garage. Tyler looked anxious. He kept scratching at his arm and avoiding eye contact. Michael closed the door behind us and said, "He took something from the truck." Tyler pulled a small flash drive from his pocket and set it on the workbench. "And some photos," he added. They were loose in the box, like someone had just stuffed them in before leaving. He looked at us like he was waiting to be scolded. "I didn't think it was a big deal," he said. "I figured if the guy came back for it, I'd leave it somewhere or mail it or something." Michael asked what was on the drive. Tyler didn't answer. He just plugged it into his laptop and opened the first file. It was a video, grainy, dimly lit. A man sat at a folding table in what looked like a garage or storage room, lit from above by a single bulb. He was in his 50s, unshaven, wearing a plain shirt. He spoke directly to the camera. No emotion. He listed names, first and last, with ages and neighborhoods. He talked about balances and justice, said things like, "They think they can move on. They're wrong." It wasn't just ranting, it was calm, calculated, detailed descriptions of how he planned to hurt people. Some of the methods were too specific. Homemade tools, escape routes, cleanup steps, like he'd already rehearsed it. We watched 2 more videos, each one worse. One had a map behind him. Another showed him loading tools into a van. Always the same tone, like he was reciting a grocery list. The photos were even more disturbing, taken from inside a car, through windows and windshields. People walking into their homes, leaving work, picking up kids. All normal places. But the way they were framed, it was clear he was following them. One picture showed a girl on a swing. Another was a man at a gas station. Same angle, same distance. Like the photographer was waiting for something. We sat there in silence for a long time. Eventually, Michael said what we were all thinking. We need to take this to the cops. But Tyler shook his head. I stole it, he said, from an active scene. They're gonna ask how I got it. I'll be screwed. I asked, You're more worried about getting in trouble than stopping whatever this is? He looked down. I don't know what this is, he said. For all we know, it's just some psycho making videos for himself. Could be fake. Just some loser talking crap. Michael pulled the drive out and held it in his hand like it was a lit match. What if it's not fake? We argued for a while. I wanted to send it anonymously, but Tyler refused to part with it. He said if the guy really was dangerous, he wanted to know what was coming. He said having it made him feel safer, like holding the evidence was a shield. That was a year ago. The flash drive is still hidden somewhere in Tyler's room. He claims he hasn't watched any more of it. We don't talk about it much. David moved to another state a few months later, said he wanted to be closer to family. Michael still brings it up sometimes, late at night, when we've had too many beers. Says he keeps waiting for one of those names to show up in the news. As for me, I check the local headlines every morning. I never stopped. And sometimes, when I'm in the parking lot or stopped at a red light, I catch myself scanning the cars around me, just looking to see if there's anyone sitting there, staring from behind the glass. Last year when I was 20, I had a part-time job at a law firm sorting through old case files in their archive basement. I was studying criminology at the time, and the job worked well with my class schedule. Most days, I just scanned documents or boxed up files for shredding. Nothing exciting. Usually I clocked out around 6 p.m., but that Tuesday night, I stayed late. I had a paper due the next morning and figured I'd use the quiet basement to finish it. No distractions. The security guard left around 11 p.m. like always. I was the only one with clearance to stay late. I had a key card and knew the alarm codes. It felt weird being alone in the building, but not unsafe. The place was silent except for the hum of the old AC unit and the soft clicking of my laptop keys. Around 11:45, I heard the front door open and close. It echoed faintly down the stairwell. The doors got a very distinct, heavy clunk when it shuts. I paused and listened, expecting footsteps or maybe the guard coming back in. Nothing. Just silence. I pulled up the camera feeds from the main floor on the old security monitor at the desk. 4 angles, all empty. I rewound a few seconds and checked again. Still nothing. The door had clearly opened, but no one came through on camera. I figured maybe a gust of wind triggered it wrong, or someone changed their mind after opening it. I checked the lock status. It still showed secure. I got up, walked to the stairwell door, opened it, and listened. The building above was dead quiet. No voices, no movement. I went back to the desk, told myself it was nothing, and got back to typing. 15 minutes later, every single light in the building shut off at once. It was like someone had flipped the master breaker. Even the little exit signs went dim. I sat there for a second in the dark, just listening. The backup generator was supposed to kick in immediately. It didn't. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, but the battery was already below 10%. The light was weak. I stood up slowly, trying to remember the exact layout of the basement. It's a maze down there. Rows and rows of waist-high filing cabinets, shelves packed with boxes, dead ends everywhere. The floor's concrete, and every step echoed hard. I started walking toward the emergency panel by the wall. I figured if the generator failed, maybe I could at least check the breaker box. But I kept bumping into things. The flashlight wasn't strong enough to show what was around the corners. At one point, I tripped over a metal cart and sent a pile of old files crashing to the ground. The noise shot through the basement like a gunshot. I froze, holding my breath. It was the kind of sound that should be followed by a voice asking if everything's okay. But there was nothing, just my own breathing. I kept moving, slower this time. Every step felt loud, like I was announcing exactly where I was. The temperature felt colder too, like the AC had kicked into high gear, even though it was probably just my nerves. Somewhere near the back of the room, a stack of cardboard shifted. Just one soft scrape, like a box dragging against concrete. I stood still again. My phone light caught the edge of something in the aisle to my left. A small binder laying on its side that hadn't been there earlier. I couldn't tell if it had fallen when I tripped earlier, or if it had been moved. I turned the light toward the cabinets, scanning left to right, but it barely reached past 5 feet. I took another step forward. The air smelled different now. Less like paper, more like sweat and metal. That scent you only really notice in closed rooms when someone's been in there too long. I stopped, turned in a slow circle, scanning every direction. Nothing. But the silence had changed. Before, it was the kind of quiet you get in an old building. Pipes creaking, distant hums. Now it was just silent, like the whole place was holding its breath. I decided to head back to the desk and get my keys. If the power wasn't coming back soon, I was getting out. I didn't care if I had to lock up in the dark. But the walk back felt longer than before. The aisles looked different. I passed a row of shelves I didn't recognize, boxes without labels, all stacked perfectly. I didn't remember organizing them like that. I moved quicker. My light flickered once. I shook the phone and it steadied. I turned a corner, expecting to see the desk, but instead found a wall of cabinets, not where it was supposed to be. I stood still, trying to remember if I'd turned wrong. I backtracked a few steps, turned another corner, and froze. One of the cabinets was open, not just cracked, a full 2 feet open. I never leave them like that. I stared at it for a long moment, then stepped closer, light pointed dead center. Nothing inside but folders and dust. But the edges of the folders were curled, like someone had flipped through them fast. I shut it slowly, making as little noise as possible. My hand was sweating so bad I almost dropped the phone. I turned around to go back, then heard another sound. A soft, slow creak of one of the rolling ladders near the back wall. The kind with wheels and metal steps. It was faint, like someone was shifting their weight on it. I didn't move. I just stood there and listened. It creaked once more, then stopped. I finally took one step backward, then another. My foot hit something soft, an envelope, a large manila one, freshly sealed. I knelt down and picked it up. No dust, no label, just sealed shut and warm, like it had been held recently. I didn't open it. I slid it into my coat pocket and stood up, not even sure why. That's when I saw it. One of the camera indicator lights flashing red. The system had backup battery. Someone was in the security office, cycling the camera feeds. I started moving fast, heart pounding, trying not to run, but walking hard in the dark, cabinets whizzing past. I rounded another corner, sure I was close to the desk, when I saw a shape move just ahead, too fast to be a trick of the light. I stopped cold and turned the flashlight toward it, but there was nothing there, just the empty aisle. And then I heard the sound of the front door upstairs opening again, louder this time. I decided to head upstairs to the main office to try and find the electrical panel, or at least reach a window where I might get some reception. The stairwell was pitch black. I held one hand on the wall and kept the other in front of me, phone light flickering low. About halfway up, my foot caught on something. I didn't see what it was until I hit the stairs hard and felt my legs get tangled in a bunch of computer cables. Thick, coiled cords wrapped around my ankles and knees, and for a second I couldn't breathe. It felt like hands grabbing me. I kicked hard until the cords slipped loose and scrambled to my feet. I stood still, chest heaving, listening for anything. Still quiet. I turned my light downward and saw the cables had been pulled from an old storage bin at the top of the stairs. The lid was off, contents scattered. I stepped over the mess and made it up to the main floor. It was colder up there. The windows along the far side of the office were just pale rectangles in the dark. I aimed for them, moving through rows of desks and cubicles, but I kept bumping into chairs. Every metal leg scraping against the floor made me wince. I hit my shin on a coffee table and had to bite my lip to keep from yelling. When I finally reached the corner office window, I pressed my phone up to the glass and tried calling 911. No bars. I turned in a slow circle, phone raised, but still nothing. The landlines were dead too. I checked. I started opening drawers, searching for a flashlight or battery pack, anything to boost the phone, but found nothing but pens and dead sticky notes. I made my way to the front entrance. The thick double doors looked normal enough, but when I pushed, they didn't move. I tried again, shoulder pressed to the frame, locked solid. The keypad on the wall was dark. Without power, the electronic locks weren't going anywhere. I swiped my key card anyway, just in case. Nothing. I pulled on the handle again. Still locked. I went to the small reception desk to see if there was an emergency override key, but the drawers were locked. I circled back to the security desk and sat down, phone clutched in my hand. It was almost dead now. I stared through the window, waiting for headlights, but there were none. Just empty street and dim lamplight. Every few minutes I thought I heard something. Papers shifting, creaks in the ceiling, the distant sound of something soft dragging against tile. But nothing ever came into view. By midnight I was curled up under the desk, trying to stay awake. I kept the phone light aimed toward the stairs, in case anything moved. Once or twice I thought I heard a footstep up there, but it could have been the building settling. I didn't want to go check. Around 2 a.m. I stood up and banged on the window again, just to make noise. It made me feel less trapped. At some point I dozed off sitting upright, chin to chest. I woke up to a thud from somewhere above me, but when I stood, everything was quiet again. I was getting so jumpy that even the creak of the door hinges, when the wind pushed against them, made me flinch. I checked my phone. 4:12 a.m., still no service. I moved back toward the corner window. Outside it was still dark. The streetlights were dimmer than usual. I tapped the glass, more out of habit than hope. The stillness was suffocating. I went back and forth between the front lobby and the stairs, trying to stay moving, but every corner of that office looked wrong in the dark. I passed the printer room once and noticed the door was open when I was sure I'd closed it earlier. I didn't go in. I just turned and walked the other way, hands in fists, ears straining for anything that sounded like breathing or movement behind me. Around 6 a.m., the street outside finally started to shift color. The sky turned a dull gray, and I saw a small utility truck pull into the parking lane. I ran to the window and started pounding hard. The guys inside looked up, confused at first, but then one of them jumped out and came toward the door. I waved my phone, pointed at the lock. It took a minute, but eventually they went around the back, got into the building, and came to open the front from the inside. "Are you all right?" one of the technicians asked. I nodded, barely. They explained there had been a power surge around midnight, knocked out several blocks, including the law firm. The surge had glitched the building's security system. It locked every external door and disabled the backup battery for the lights. The security guard had noticed something wrong from his remote app and tried to call the office, but the landlines were out. They said he showed up around 2 a.m. and knocked but didn't see anyone. I must have been in the stairwell or asleep under the desk. I thanked them, stepped outside, and breathed for the first time in what felt like hours. The cold morning air stung, but I didn't care. I walked to the end of the block before calling a rideshare. I called in sick to class. Didn't even check the time. When I got home, I left the lights on. I didn't sleep much that day, or that week. And now, even months later, anytime I hear fluorescent lights flicker or a distant door creak in a quiet building, my stomach drops. I haven't stayed late again since. Not once. When I was 16, I met this 14-year-old kid named Ethan at our local youth center. It was one of those drop-in places with old couches, mismatched board games, and a couple of busted guitars that always seemed to be out of tune. I volunteered there after school a few times a week, mostly just helping set up chairs for events and keeping the fridge stocked with canned drinks. Ethan showed up one night during a movie screening, sat by himself near the back, and kept looking over like he wanted to talk but couldn't figure out how to start. Eventually, I asked if he liked the movie, and we ended up talking for almost 2 hours about horror films and 90s punk bands. Neither of us were really old enough to remember. He was only 2 years younger than me, but something about the way he carried himself made him seem older. Not in a fake or try-hard way, but more like someone who'd been through some stuff and didn't feel the need to prove anything. We started texting every day. He had this quiet confidence I liked, and even though I knew his age would probably make people raise an eyebrow, it didn't feel weird at the time. I think I just liked how easy he was to talk to. We'd meet up in the afternoons, sometimes hang out at the park or at this little corner cafe that didn't card you for coffee refills. He played guitar, pretty well actually, and he'd bring it sometimes and just mess around with it while we sat and talked. The first time he held my hand, we were sitting on the floor at the youth center with our backs against the vending machine. He didn't say anything, just reached over and held it like it was the most natural thing in the world. We dated for about 3 months. It wasn't anything dramatic or intense. We never even went on a real date, not in the dinner and a movie sense. Just long walks, long talks, and a lot of texts that made my heart race in the quiet hours of the night. Then one day he just stopped replying. I figured his phone had died or something, but after a few days I started asking around. Turns out his parents had found our texts. They took his phone, grounded him, and told him he wasn't allowed to see me anymore. I got a weird mix of messages from his friends, some saying he missed me, some saying he was done. I didn't know what to believe, and after a week or two of silence, I gave up trying to figure it out. It was weird at first not hearing from him. I kept thinking he'd show up at the youth center again, like nothing had happened. But he didn't. And after a while, I stopped waiting. Instead, I started spending more time with Mike. He was in my chemistry class, always making sarcastic comments under his breath that cracked me up at the worst times. We'd known each other for a while, but we weren't especially close until one afternoon I was assigned to work with him on a lab. We messed up the experiment, but laughed the whole time, and something just shifted after that. He started walking me to class, texting me random memes during study hall, and inviting me to hang out with his group on the weekends. There wasn't some big moment where I realized I liked him. It just kind of happened, slow and steady, like a pot of water warming on the stove. I'd go home thinking about something he said and find myself smiling like an idiot. I still thought about Ethan sometimes, but the longer he stayed silent, the more I felt like maybe we weren't supposed to be a thing. Mike didn't come with a bunch of restrictions or drama. I didn't have to worry about getting him in trouble or sneaking around. It was easy, and for once, I wanted easy. The school's spring dance rolled around a few weeks later. It wasn't prom or anything fancy, just an end-of-semester thing they held in the gym with a cheap DJ and folding tables lined with plastic cups of punch. I hadn't planned to go. I wasn't even sure if Mike was going. But the week before, he asked if I wanted to go with him. Not in a, will you be my date way, more like, we're all going, wanna come too? And I said yes. I wore a simple black dress my sister had handed down, curled my hair, and met up with Mike and his friends outside the gym. It was loud and hot inside. Someone had dimmed the lights and strung up those fake twinkle lights that never seemed to hang evenly. We milled around awkwardly at first, just talking and laughing over the music. Then about halfway through the night, Mike turned to me and asked, "You want to dance?" I wasn't much of a dancer, but something about the way he asked made it feel okay to say yes. So I nodded, and he led me onto the floor. We weren't good at it. Not even close. He kept stepping on my toes, and I couldn't stop laughing. Then, just as the tempo slowed, I saw Ethan standing near the bleachers. He was alone, arms crossed, his hair longer than I remembered. I froze for a second. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was still grounded, I thought. Our eyes met, and he didn't smile. Just watched. Mike didn't notice at first. He leaned in, brushed some hair from my cheek and said, "You're actually not that bad at this." I smiled back. I knew Ethan was watching, but I didn't pull away. And then, without planning it, I leaned in and kissed Mike. It wasn't some long, dramatic kiss. Just a quick one. A choice. And when I pulled back, Mike looked surprised, then grinned. I glanced over again. Ethan was still there, but his face had changed. He looked like someone had just punched him in the stomach. For a second, I felt guilty. Not because I kissed Mike, but because I hadn't expected Ethan to show up, hadn't expected to see him see it. But I didn't look away. I didn't apologize. Because in that moment, I knew I couldn't keep living like I was waiting for someone who couldn't even text me back. Mike and I dated all the way through senior year. We didn't have one of those dramatic relationships, no big blowouts or breakups and reunions. It was steady, easy, normal. He'd walk me home after school most days, help my dad fix up our old car on weekends, and came to all the boring family birthday dinners without complaining. We graduated together, went to community college in town, and moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner. We didn't have much money, but we were happy, or at least I thought we were. When we were 22, we got married at a little park just outside of town. It was a small ceremony. His brother brought the speaker for music, and my aunt made the cake. We didn't even have a honeymoon. We just went back to the apartment that night, sat on the couch, and watched reruns until we passed out. A year later, our first daughter was born, and 2 years after that, we had a son. Life was busy and messy and loud. I spent most days trying to keep the kids from drawing on the walls or fighting over cereal boxes, and Mike worked at a local hardware store while finishing his degree at night. It wasn't perfect. We had money problems and disagreements like anyone else. There were nights when we barely spoke because we were too tired or too stressed. But I always felt like we were on the same team. He was a good dad, present, dependable, never the kind of guy to disappear or lose his temper. I'd think back sometimes to those months I spent with Ethan and wonder what my life might have looked like if I hadn't walked away. Not in a longing way, just curiosity. I never kept in touch with anyone from the youth center after high school, so Ethan sort of faded out of my world. Then about 10 years later, I was working as a cashier at a grocery store a few blocks from our neighborhood. One afternoon during my shift, one of my co-workers, Renee, started talking about someone she went to church with. She mentioned the name Ethan, and something clicked. I asked what his last name was, and when she said it, I just said, I used to know him like a long time ago. That was all she needed. She started talking like I'd given her permission to spill everything. According to her, Ethan had gotten married young, right after high school actually, to a girl he'd been with on and off for years. But it didn't last long. Renee said they were already separated by the time they turned 24. She lowered her voice like she was sharing some huge secret and said, honestly, it was bound to fall apart. He was always chasing other women. I think he cheated on her even before they got married. I just listened, bagging groceries while she went on. I heard he got 2 girls pregnant while he was still married. One of them tried to take him to court for child support, but he quit his job right after the papers were filed. Real classy move. Now he bounces around between jobs, can't keep anything steady for more than a few months. She paused to swipe a barcode and then added, his own family barely talks to him now. His mom told my sister she's done cleaning up his messes. Apparently he's been like that since high school. Always thought he was smarter than everyone else. Thought he could get away with anything if he smiled enough. I didn't say much. Just kept scanning and nodding. I hadn't thought about Ethan in years, not really. But hearing all of that, I couldn't help but feel a little unsettled. Not shocked, but like I was piecing something together in hindsight. He'd always had this way of being charming and intense, like you were the only person in the room. But there'd also been this strange edge, even when we were young. He always wanted more. Attention, control, something. And now I wondered how much of that had been there all along, under the surface. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, I sat on the porch with Mike. We were both exhausted. He was finishing some paperwork for a plumbing company he'd just started working for. I didn't tell him about the conversation with Renee. I just sat there, watching him underline some numbers on a clipboard, and felt this deep, quiet relief. Our marriage wasn't exciting or dramatic. We never took big vacations or did anything flashy, but it had been real. We built a life together from the ground up. We raised our kids with routines and bedtime stories and dance parties in the kitchen. We made it last 18 years. And even when it ended, it didn't explode. It just faded. We grew apart, drifted in different directions, and one day we both admitted it was time. We split everything down the middle, signed the papers, and promised to always put the kids first. We still text almost every day. Sometimes it's about soccer schedules, sometimes it's just a funny video we know the other one will laugh at. I think about that spring dance sometimes. That moment, one kiss, one decision, how different my life could have been. I could have chased the intensity, the mystery, the boy with the quiet smirk and messy hair. But I didn't. I turned toward the guy who showed up, the one who held my hand when the music got too loud. And maybe that's why I avoided the kind of heartbreak that doesn't just leave you crying, but leaves your whole life in pieces. It's strange how something so small can end up mattering so much. That one choice didn't just change my night, it changed my future. And when I look back, I don't regret a thing. When I was 23, I worked at this electronics store inside a mall in Phoenix. Nothing fancy, just a mid-range spot that sold game consoles, headphones, all that kind of stuff. I usually did evening shifts because they paid a little extra for closing, and honestly, I liked the quiet that came once the place started to empty out. That night started just like any other. Around 7:30 or so, this guy walks in carrying a boxed-up gaming console. Said his name was Dennis. He looked maybe early 40s, bald spot, scruffy stubble, stained denim jacket. He smiled a little too much. He wanted to exchange the console, said it was a gift from his nephew who already had one. I took it to the counter, started checking the serial number and packaging like we were supposed to. The return seemed legit, but Dennis didn't just stand quietly while I worked. He kept talking. First it was normal stuff, where he got the console, what games he liked, the usual. Then it turned into, "You've got a really nice smile," and "You're too pretty to be working retail." I tried to ignore it and stay focused on the return. Told him politely that I was married. Not that I was, but it was my go-to line for situations like that. Didn't matter. He said something like, "That don't bother me," and chuckled. I didn't laugh. I finished up the return and handed him the receipt, but he just stood there. Then he asked for my number. I said no, again as polite as I could. He still didn't move. I glanced around the store, but my coworker was in the back room doing inventory. I just wanted the guy gone, so I gave him the store number, the main line. I figured if he called, someone would pick up and maybe confuse him enough that he'd drop it. He seemed satisfied finally, and walked off. I didn't think much of it after that. We closed up a little before 10, started shutting down displays, locking the cases. I clocked out, grabbed my bag, and headed through the employee exit at the back of the mall. It led into a smaller parking lot reserved for staff, with one flickering streetlight and a bunch of faded lines on the pavement. My car was parked near the far corner, under the tree line where the light barely reached. I was halfway across the lot when I saw someone standing next to it. I slowed down. It was Dennis. He was leaning against the hood, arms crossed, like he'd just been waiting there for me. He smiled when he saw me and gave a little wave, like we were old friends meeting up for a movie. I didn't say anything. I just kept walking toward my car, keys in hand. "You off already?" he called out, like it was some kind of normal conversation. I didn't answer him. He stepped away from the car and followed alongside me. "You want to grab a coffee or something? Just talk. I'm a good guy, I promise." I told him no, firm this time. "I'm going home." He kept pace with me anyway. When I unlocked the car and opened the driver's side door, he was right there. Not close enough to touch me, but closer than made sense. "You sure?" he said. "Just a coffee." "You don't gotta lie about being married. I get it. I just want to talk." I didn't say anything. I got in and slammed the door shut, locking it as soon as it closed. He knocked on the window lightly. Then again, a little harder. I started the engine. He walked next to my car as I pulled out, still tapping the window with his knuckle, grinning like none of this was weird. I took the exit out of the garage without looking back, but I watched the rearview mirror until the mall faded from view. That night I didn't sleep much. Every little sound outside made me tense up. I checked all the locks twice. I even blocked the sliding glass door with a chair. Next morning, I showed up for my shift a little early, still wired from the night before. I hadn't told anyone yet, just wanted to get through the day and forget it. But then my manager pulled me aside. "Someone's been calling the store," she said. "Asked for you by name. Like 5 times since we opened. Doesn't say who he is. Just keeps asking if you're working today." Dennis called the store 6 times that day. My coworkers started joking about it at first, then got annoyed. One of them, Jason, started recognizing his voice and would just hang up the moment he heard it. But Dennis kept calling back. He never left a name or a message, just kept asking, "Is she working today?" The others didn't know the full story yet. I hadn't told them. I didn't want to make a scene, and part of me still hoped it would just stop on its own. Later that afternoon, one of my coworkers checked the phone logs and found out Dennis had been texting random numbers from the store's text-to-chat line. Just weird stuff like, "Hey, is this her?" and "I saw you smile at me yesterday." They all looked similar. Short, obsessive, and trying to guess who had been talking to him. That's when it really started creeping everyone out. When I walked in for my next shift the following day, I saw him before I even clocked in. He was already inside, standing by the wall of flat-screen TVs, flipping through the picture modes like a regular shopper. I froze for a second, then walked fast to the back, trying not to show anything on my face. I told my manager he was there again, and she told me to just ignore him and do my job, that we couldn't kick someone out unless they actually did something. So I went out onto the floor. For the next 2 hours, he followed me around the store, pretending to browse, asking random questions about products, always keeping me in sight. At one point, I was showing a young couple a Bluetooth speaker, and Dennis came over, stood right behind them, and started commenting about how sweet I looked when I smiled. The couple left without buying anything. Customers started noticing. I could see people glancing over their shoulders and whispering. It wasn't just me anymore. The whole place felt tense. I finished what I could and ducked into the break room 5 minutes early for my lunch. I locked the office door behind me and sat on the floor with my back against it. That's when I called my husband. I told him I needed him to come pick me up after work, not to park in our usual spot. I didn't want Dennis to know what kind of car he should look for. The next day, I didn't see Dennis at first. I thought maybe it had stopped. But midway through my shift, our district manager showed up. He asked to speak with me privately, said there had been a formal complaint submitted about my behavior. I didn't understand at first. Then he read the report. Dennis had filed it, claiming I was rude to him, dismissive, that I had embarrassed him in front of other customers. He was demanding disciplinary action, either a written warning or termination. I just sat there for a minute, staring at the floor, before I told him everything. From the return counter to the parking lot to the phone calls. I explained how he followed me, stood outside my car, knocked on my window, and wouldn't stop calling. My boss was silent the whole time. When I was done, she didn't ask questions. She just stood up, walked out, and went straight to the security desk. That same day, Dennis was officially banned from our store. My manager sent a photo of him to mall security with instructions to remove him if he came back. She even walked me to my car that night. I thought that would be it, that I could finally relax. But it didn't end there. He started showing up at other stores in the mall. I'd see him by the coffee kiosk near the food court, or standing by the window of the shoe store across from ours. He never came inside again, but he didn't have to. Every time I went on lunch, he managed to spot me. I started eating in the back room. I stopped using the food court restroom. I stopped parking in the same spot. 3 weeks later, security caught him loitering near our entrance again. One of the guards recognized him and decided to follow him out to the parking lot. Dennis got in his car and just sat there, engine running. The guard called the police. They came out and questioned him. He said he was just shopping and waiting for someone. But when they searched his vehicle, they found a folder in the passenger seat. Inside were photos, pictures of me walking to work, getting out of my car, sitting in the food court. Some were zoomed in, some blurry, all clearly taken without me knowing. There was also a notebook. Inside, he had written down my work schedule, the days I closed, the time I usually took lunch. There were notes about my car, color, make, plate number, and about my coworkers. Who talked to me the most, who I seemed close to. They arrested him for stalking and harassment. During the investigation, police found out he'd done similar things before. At least 2 other women, both retail workers. One of them had moved across the city after he started showing up outside her apartment. The other had filed a restraining order a year earlier. But charges were dropped back then. I learned a lot from that. Giving someone your work number doesn't protect you. It just gives them a thread to pull. People like Dennis don't need much. A smile, a phone number. The fact that you didn't raise your voice when you said no. They'll take any of it as a signal to keep going. Some people don't stop unless someone makes them. And being polite isn't what saves you. Sometimes, it's exactly what puts you in danger. So when I was working at a logistics company in Texas, I picked up an overtime shift before the holidays in January 2015. The warehouse was completely empty except for me, which was normal for evening shifts. It was one of those big, echoey spaces where even a small sound bounced off the steel walls and rolled down the aisles. I brought a thermos of coffee and had a Bluetooth speaker playing music low from my phone just to break up the silence. Everything was fine until around 8:30, when I heard the loading dock gates opening. These were the automatic kind that only opened when trucks backed up against the sensors. No one was scheduled, so I assumed either a delivery was running late, or someone from day shift forgot to tell me about a pickup. I grabbed my badge and flashlight and started heading down to check. When I got there, the gates were closed and locked. The indicator light on the control box was red, showing the gate hadn't moved. But I'd clearly heard it opening. I stood there for a moment, confused, then checked the ground. No fresh tire tracks on the sensor pad. I tried the side entrance doors. All locked, just like they should be. Then I noticed the walkie sitting on the bench by the workstation was on full volume, squawking static. I remembered switching it off at the start of the shift because I didn't need it. No one else was on the floor. I picked it up and turned the knob. It clicked like it had just been turned on. My nameplate was still sitting where I left it. Everything else looked untouched. But something felt off. I went back to my desk to check the access logs on the terminal. Nothing showed for the last 2 hours. No entries. That confirmed it. No trucks had pulled up. No one should have been out there. I did a slow loop through the floor just to be sure, checking every exit and side door. They were all secure. I tried brushing it off as mechanical noise or something outside, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in there with me. Back at my station, I noticed my company hat was missing from the hook where I always left it. It wasn't the type of thing I'd forget. I kept it there every shift and always grabbed it before clocking out. I looked around in case it had fallen, but the hook was empty, and the floor around it was clear. That's when the motion sensor lights in the far corridor blinked on. That section had been half broken for months. Only the emergency bulbs lit up dim red down the hall. The main overheads didn't work at all. I stood up and looked down toward the far end. Someone was moving back there. Big guy. Wide frame. He was wearing what looked like a dark security uniform, but he wasn't moving like one of our guards. They usually checked in at the front office and never came down alone like that. This guy had something in his hand, but I couldn't see what it was from that distance. I took a step toward him and called out, "Hey, who's down there?" No answer. He didn't flinch or react, just stood there with his shoulders slightly hunched, like he was listening. I called out again. Still nothing. The figure didn't move for a few seconds, then slowly started walking toward me. I backed up a step, keeping my eyes on him. He wasn't running, wasn't saying anything, just moving steady, deliberate. There was no badge on his uniform that I could see. No flashlight, no radio. Just that object in his hand, swinging slightly with each step. I looked around quickly for something to grab. Pipe wrench, crowbar, anything. But the workstation was clear except for my thermos and clipboard. I turned and walked fast down the nearest row of shelves, keeping low between pallets. I wanted to get to the manager's office and lock the door. I heard the crunch of his boots echoing behind me, but he wasn't running. He was following. I ran straight to the bathroom and slammed the door shut behind me, locking it with trembling hands. The lock clicked, but it felt paper thin between me and whatever was out there. I backed into the corner, heart hammering. A few seconds passed. Then I saw the boots. Black work boots, scuffed at the toes, stopping right outside the stall. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't move, didn't blink. The boots shifted slightly, turning in my direction. Then a face appeared, upside down, peering through the gap between the floor and the bottom of the door. Pale skin, greasy white hair, eyes too wide. He grinned like he knew something I didn't, like this was a game and he was the only one playing. His teeth were yellow, jagged. I screamed and shoved the door open with my shoulder, slamming it into his head. He grunted, stumbled sideways, and I bolted past him. I didn't stop running until I reached the side entrance. It should have been locked, was always locked, but it gave way as soon as I hit it. I tore through the parking lot, barely noticing how cold the air had gotten. My car keys were already in my hand when I got there. I fumbled them once, dropped them, then scooped them up and jumped inside. I locked the doors, turned off the engine, and sat there shaking. It took me 20 minutes to stop gasping for air. I stared at the warehouse the entire time. The lights were still on. Nothing moved. Finally, I grabbed my phone and called security. When the guards showed up, I walked them to the side entrance and pointed to the bathroom. They searched everything: hallways, storage cages, loading docks. Every door was locked. The alarm system hadn't been tripped. No sign of anyone. The guards were polite, but I could tell they didn't believe me. One of them even asked if I might have fallen asleep and dreamed it. I didn't argue. I just went home. The next morning, I came back early before my shift. I wanted to talk to my supervisor, maybe pull footage or at least get someone to check the badge access logs. When I walked into the office, something was already off. The main computer was on, not locked. The login screen wasn't even up. It was just sitting at the desktop. Company policy said everything had to be shut down at night, and I'd personally watched the office manager power it off the day before. Then I saw my hat. It was back on the hook. The same hook I had checked the night of the incident. It looked freshly brushed off, perfectly hung. My name tag facing forward. My stomach turned. My supervisor came in around 7:45. I told him everything. At first, he looked concerned, but when I mentioned the man in the bathroom, he got quiet. He asked HR to pull security footage, and they did. We sat together and watched. The cameras near the loading dock showed me running full speed toward the exit. No one behind me. Just me. Alone. The hallway I'd seen the figure in, camera 4, had been malfunctioning for weeks. Nothing recorded. Just a frozen image and static. HR was sympathetic, but not surprised. They said working extended hours alone can cause stress reactions, hallucinations. They asked if I'd been getting enough sleep. I told them I had. They nodded, said maybe a few days off would help me reset. I didn't argue. I took the days, and I didn't go back that week. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in the break room when one of the day shift supervisors came in and sat across from me. He was an older guy, been with the company for over a decade. He asked if I'd been doing okay since the incident. I nodded and said, "Trying to." Then he said, "You ever hear of Frank?" I said no. He leaned back. "Frank was our night guard last year. Worked here 10 years. Got let go around January. Came in drunk one night and passed out in the main corridor. Took us 30 minutes to find him. HR fired him the next day." I asked why he was telling me this. Because he's tried getting back in more than once. Caught him 3 times last spring snooping around the West Dock. Claimed he still had business here. Knew all the entry codes. We changed them, but some of the old doors, ones connected to the service access, still run on the legacy system. I didn't say anything. He kept going. Tall guy. Used to wear a uniform even after we let him go. Pale skin, real twitchy, teeth like he hadn't seen a dentist in a decade. That was him. That was exactly who I saw. Security did a sweep the next night. They checked every inch of the place and found a loose vent panel behind the maintenance office. Inside were energy bar wrappers, empty water bottles, and a flashlight. Someone had been hiding in there. Maybe for days. They think he was coming in during the night shifts, watching from the shadows. Maybe trying to steal equipment. Maybe just trying to prove he still belonged. Either way, he was gone by the time they checked. I never worked alone in that warehouse again. They brought in a second overnight staffer, sometimes a guard. I didn't argue. Sometimes people don't want to let go. Sometimes they can't. They haunt the places they were pushed out of, not because of anything supernatural, but because they think the world was wrong to leave them behind. That's the part that stuck with me the most. Not the pale face, not the filthy grin, but the fact that he really believed he was still one of us. When I was in college, my roommate Kyle and I rented this small apartment near campus in Portland. It wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen that opened into a living room, and 1 bathroom we shared. The floors creaked like crazy, and the walls were so thin we could hear everything from the unit next door. But it was cheap and close to school, so we didn't care. At first, everything felt normal. We were both taking full class loads, trying to balance jobs on the side. Kyle worked nights at a grocery store, stocking shelves. I had early morning classes and spent most afternoons in the campus library. We barely saw each other during the week, but we'd catch up over microwave dinners on Sundays, or when we both happened to be home before midnight. Nothing seemed off at first. It started with small things. One day, I went to the fridge to grab the leftover burrito I'd been saving, and it was just gone. I asked Kyle if he'd eaten it, and he swore he hadn't. A few days later, I noticed the milk was lower than it should have been, like someone had been using it. I figured maybe I'd forgotten how much I used in my cereal. Then my textbook, macroeconomics, a heavy thing I never moved unless I had to, ended up on the kitchen counter. I was sure I left it on my desk. Sometimes we'd come home and the TV would be on. Not just left on the home screen, actually playing something random, like old sitcoms. But Kyle thought I was leaving it on, and I thought he was. Once or twice, I even found the living room light on in the morning, when I knew for sure I'd turned it off the night before. We laughed about it at first, saying we were just losing it from the stress of finals and caffeine overload. But it kept happening. Every week, something else. Kyle brushed it off. He said I was probably just tired, and with him gone at night, maybe I was getting things mixed up. "You sure you're not sleepwalking or something?" he asked once. I wasn't. I knew I wasn't. Still, I tried not to overthink it. I just started locking my bedroom door at night and keeping my wallet in my backpack instead of leaving it on the kitchen table. By mid-November, it was getting colder, and I stopped going out unless I had to. I spent more time studying in my room and cooked quick meals when Kyle was at work. He'd leave around 9:30 p.m. and get home after sunrise. One night, I noticed the bathroom cabinet was open. I always close it after I brush my teeth. I closed it, made a mental note, and went to bed. Then came the night in December when I was home alone. Kyle had the overnight shift, and I had a final the next day. I remember it clearly because I'd made instant ramen and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, studying my notes. I had a pair of headphones on, but no music, just using them to block out distractions. Around midnight, I got up to refill my water. The apartment was silent, except for the occasional hum of the fridge. I was reaching for my glass when I heard the front door handle jiggle. Not a knock, like someone trying to unlock it. I froze. The handle turned. I stood there, holding my breath. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. About 6 inches. No footsteps, no voice, no shadow. Just a gap in cold air from the hallway slipping inside. I grabbed the baseball bat we kept near the kitchen, more as a joke than anything, and stepped toward the door. When I yanked it open, the hallway was empty. Dead silent. I walked out onto the landing and checked both directions. Nothing. Just the glow of the hallway lights and the buzzing of an old vending machine by the stairwell. I checked the stairwell too. No one. I went back inside, locked the door, and slid the chain across. I called Kyle right away. He picked up and sounded half asleep. I told him someone just opened the door, like, with a key. He asked me to check if the deadbolt was scratched or if the chain had been forced, but I told him no. It didn't look forced at all. He was quiet for a second, then said, "I'll talk to the landlord tomorrow. We should probably change the locks." I barely slept that night. I kept thinking about that door slowly opening, not kicked in, not rattled. Just turning, like someone who belonged there, like someone who thought they still had the right. We also set up a cheap webcam system pointing at our door. It was just an old laptop we weren't using, hooked up to a basic USB webcam and running some free motion detection software I found online. Kyle was skeptical, but I needed some kind of proof or peace of mind. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. We kept the setup running every night and checked the footage every morning. Nothing but quiet, empty frames. We started thinking maybe I really had imagined the door thing, or maybe someone tried once and gave up. Then, one morning, I opened the folder where the program saved clips and saw a video time-stamped 3:12 a.m. The clip was about 10 minutes long. At first, it showed nothing. Just our closed front door, dimly lit by the hallway light seeping through the peephole. But then a man walked into frame. He looked to be in his 40s, wearing a dark windbreaker, jeans, and sneakers. Short hair. He didn't knock. He didn't even hesitate. He pulled out a key ring and started trying different keys one by one. Calm, focused, like he wasn't in a rush at all. It took him almost 10 minutes. At one point he paused and glanced around, but never looked at the camera. I don't think he knew it was there. When none of the keys worked, he gave up and walked away. I sat there frozen for a few seconds. Then I called Kyle at work and told him to come home. We copied the clip onto a flash drive and walked straight to campus police. They took it seriously. An officer sat us down, watched the video twice, and asked if we recognized the man. We didn't. They said they'd look into it and get back to us. It took 2 days. When the campus police called us back in, they already had a name: Richard Thompson. He used to live in our unit before we moved in. Got evicted about 8 months earlier for not paying rent, and according to the landlord, had left without turning in his keys. The guy had apparently made copies. Turns out, this wasn't the first time Richard had come up in reports. 2 other tenants in nearby buildings had mentioned food going missing, or seeing someone who didn't belong walking their halls at night. The difference was, we had footage. The police got a warrant and picked him up at his new place across town. They found boxes stacked along the walls, labeled by building names and apartment numbers. Some boxes had wallets, chargers, watches, textbooks, even shoes. He'd been doing this for over a year, slipping into places when no one was home, staying just long enough to take what he wanted. Sometimes he'd just use your stuff. Watch TV, eat leftovers, take a shower. Other times he'd steal a laptop, some headphones, or a little cash. Nothing big enough to draw attention. When they showed us the photos from the search, we recognized some of the items. A speaker Kyle thought he'd lost during a move. My old headphones I figured I left in class. But there were other things we hadn't even noticed missing. A USB drive, some kitchen tools, random chargers, stuff you wouldn't file a report over, stuff you just assume you misplaced. The part that really got to me wasn't the things he took. It was the notebook. Richard had been keeping a record. Pages and pages of scribbles, times, apartment numbers, and schedules. He'd written down Kyle's night shifts, exact start and end times. He had my class schedule down to the hour. Even wrote notes about what time we usually showered or left to grab food. He knew we'd started locking our bedroom doors. He knew we kept a bat near the kitchen. He had notes about our webcam thing, too. We think that's why he stopped trying after that last night. Campus police said he had keys to at least 6 other apartments, maybe more. He'd made a whole routine out of it, targeting student housing because it was easy to predict our habits. He looked completely normal. He wasn't homeless, wasn't visibly unstable, just a guy who figured out how to make himself invisible. We packed up that weekend. We'd already signed the lease for the spring semester, but we told the landlord we were leaving anyway. He didn't argue. I think he felt guilty for not changing the locks after evicting the guy. We found a different place on the other side of town, closer to Kyle's job. I still lock my bedroom door at night. Still check over my shoulder when I walk into my apartment. Even now, when I hear the door creak or a floorboard pop, my mind goes back to that webcam footage. To the man standing just a few feet away, quietly testing keys while we slept. Trust your gut when something feels off. We almost ignored it. We almost convinced ourselves we were just tired and forgetful. But we weren't. We were being watched, tracked, and invaded. You're not paranoid. You're just the only one paying attention. So for the context, I lived in the Philadelphia suburbs and had this neighbor Brad Wilson who seemed like a decent guy. We'd help each other with yard work, lend tools, that kind of neighborly stuff. When Brad announced he was moving and having a yard sale, my wife and I decided to check it out. Maybe find some cheap household items or furniture. I was browsing through his tools when I saw a DeWalt drill that looked exactly like mine. Same model, same wear pattern, even the same distinctive scratch on the side that I'd made while working on my deck 2 years earlier. I picked up the drill and examined it closer. There was no doubt it was mine. I also recognized my paint compressor sitting nearby and several of my garden tools laid out on his table. My stomach dropped as I realized what was happening. I made an excuse to my wife about needing to check something at home and walked back to my garage. Sure enough, all those items were gone from their usual spots. I'd been so busy with work lately that I hadn't used most of those tools in weeks and hadn't noticed they were missing. I walked back toward the yard sale, trying not to look as unsettled as I felt. I passed a couple looking at his snowblower and nodded at Brad like everything was fine. He gave me a friendly, "Hey, back already?" and I just smiled and said I forgot something. I took another quick look around his tables, just to be sure. There was my long-handled hedge clipper, the handle still taped from when it split, and the red toolbox with the latch that always jammed. I stood there, pretending to examine a power sander, but I was watching Brad from the corner of my eye. He didn't look nervous or shady. He looked like a guy selling stuff before a move, like he believed none of it was mine. My wife came over, asking if I saw anything good. I told her I'd changed my mind and we should go. She looked confused but didn't push it. I kept it quiet until we got home. Then I told her everything. She didn't want to believe it at first. She even asked if maybe I'd lent Brad the tools and forgot. But I don't lend out half my garage. I told her I'd double-checked, and I knew what I saw. She looked shaken too. We'd always trusted Brad. We'd let his kids use our pool. I sat at the kitchen table for a while, trying to think. I didn't want to start a fight or make accusations without being sure. But it didn't matter. I was sure. That was my stuff out there. I decided to take pictures. I went back out alone, told Brad I wanted to browse again. I made small talk, asked about the move, and snapped a few photos with my phone while pretending to compare prices. I got shots of the drill, the toolbox, the compressor, and the hedge clipper. It wasn't hard. He had everything laid out neat on folding tables in his driveway. Later that night, I went through the photos, comparing them with older pictures from my phone and home project albums. There was no doubt. Same scratch, same dent, same paint marks. I had proof, but I wasn't sure what to do with it. Brad was moving in a week. I didn't want a huge scene with neighbors watching. So the next day, I drove to the local police station and filed a report. I brought my photos and explained the situation. They said they'd send someone to talk to him. I didn't hear anything for a few days. Then on Wednesday evening, a cruiser pulled up next door. I watched from behind the curtain as a uniformed officer rang Brad's bell. Brad came out looking casual, wearing gym shorts and sandals. They talked for maybe 10 minutes. I couldn't hear what was said, but I saw Brad wave his arms a little, like he was frustrated. The officer pointed at the tables. Brad looked toward our house once, then nodded. They spoke some more, and the cop left. The tables stayed up. The drill was still out there. Nothing changed. I waited another day, then called the officer. He said Brad denied stealing anything, claimed he'd bought those tools at estate sales or got them from his brother. No receipts, of course. The officer said without serial numbers or clear markings, it was tough to prove anything. He understood why I was angry, but unless I had rock-solid proof or video, it would be hard to recover the items. So that was it. I stood in my own driveway, staring at my own stolen tools laid out 20 feet away, and couldn't do anything about it. The next morning, the tables were gone. Brad must have sold what he could and packed up the rest. By Saturday, a moving truck pulled in. I watched from the porch as he loaded boxes, furniture, bins. He didn't look at me once. The truck pulled away just after noon. His house sat empty, curtains drawn, the for sale sign still planted in the lawn. I walked into my garage and stared at the empty shelves, at the outlines where my tools used to hang. The scratch on the deck rail still caught the light just right, same shape as the one on the drill. I stared at it for a long time. I went back to Brad's sale and confronted him directly. I didn't bother with small talk. I walked straight to the table, pointed at the DeWalt drill and asked, "Where'd you get this?" He looked up, real casual, and said, "Picked it up at a bankruptcy auction. Couple months back. Got a whole load of tools." I didn't respond right away. I kept my eyes on him, then slowly turned the drill over in my hands and ran my thumb across the long white scratch on the side. "This exact model?" I asked. "With the same scratch and paint mark?" He squinted like he was confused. "A lot of drills get banged up," he said, like I was imagining things. I asked how much he wanted for it, even though I already knew what he was about to say. "120, he replied. "New ones are 300, so you're getting a deal." That line stuck with me. I was getting a deal. On my own stolen property. I told him I knew it was mine. I even described how I'd scratched it by dropping it while building my deck. I watched his face, looking for something to change, but he just shrugged and said, "Maybe you're mistaken." I looked around. Other neighbors were watching now, Mrs. Geller from across the street, and that couple from the corner lot. I didn't want to give Brad a scene he could spin later, so I just said, "Right," and walked away. Back home, I paced the garage, looking around at all the empty hooks, dusty outlines where things used to hang. The more I thought about it, the more it clicked. I'd seen Brad in here dozens of times over the last year. He'd helped me bleed the brakes on my Accord, helped me hang shelves last spring. He always came through the side gate, and I always left the side garage door unlocked when we were working. During warm weekends, it was just easier to leave it open while I was in and out with the mower or cleaning up. Brad knew that. He'd seen the habits. I'd even caught him once just stepping in and calling out for me. I thought it was normal, neighborly. But he'd been planning it, taking stuff little by little. Only the things I didn't use often. My post hole digger, the paint compressor, old hedge trimmers that I only pulled out in late summer. Stuff stored up high or tucked in corners. He didn't grab anything flashy, nothing I'd notice right away. Just small withdrawals, like a slow siphon. I stood there in the middle of the garage, trying to remember every tool I owned, every one I might have lent out. But I couldn't. That was the worst part. He'd counted on that. I called the police again the next day and told them everything. The same officer as before came out and walked through the garage with me. He was polite, but I could tell he didn't think anything would come of it. "Without serials or receipts, sir, there's just no way to prove ownership. He's saying he bought them, and unless you've got video of him taking them." I nodded. I understood. They added my statement to the file and left. Brad moved the following Saturday. A rented U-Haul, a few younger guys loading boxes. He didn't even come to say goodbye. I watched from my window as the truck pulled away, probably with a few $1,000s of my equipment packed in the back. The neighborhood felt different after that. A little quieter, a little more fake. I changed the locks on all my doors, bought motion lights, and installed cameras on all 4 corners of the house. The little ones that sync to my phone and send alerts if anyone gets too close to the garage. The worst part wasn't the money or the tools. It was the betrayal. Every time Brad had handed me a wrench or stood next to me cracking a beer after we finished a project, he was probably looking around, taking inventory. I thought back to all the times he complimented my setup, joked about how organized my pegboard was. He was studying it, like it was a store shelf. Now, when neighbors stop to chat while I'm out front trimming the hedges or working under the hood, I can't help but wonder what they're thinking. Whether they're being friendly or just checking the place out. I still wave, still make small talk, but I never turn my back on anyone anymore. Not for a second. I keep the side door locked. Every time. I told my wife I was probably overreacting, But the truth is, I don't think I am. Brad didn't break in. He didn't force a lock or smash a window. He didn't have to. He walked in through the door I left open for him. He smiled, made jokes, drank my beer, and stole from me one piece at a time. It's not just about the tools. It's about trust. Once that's gone, nothing really feels the same again. When I was 26, I used to go fishing at Lake Michigan every weekend. I wasn't great at it, but it got me out of the house and away from screens. That Saturday in October had the kind of cold wind that stings your ears, but I went anyway. Packed a thermos of coffee, my tackle box, and 3 rods. By the time the sun started dropping behind the trees, I hadn't caught a damn thing. Not even a nibble. I sat there for 6 hours staring at the water, telling myself to give it 5 more minutes every time I reached for the gear. Finally, when the sky turned a dim orange, I gave up. The parking lot was just up the hill, maybe a 5-minute walk from the shore. I grabbed my bucket, folded the chair, and started loading my stuff back into the truck. It was one of those older silver F-150s, always a little muddy, a little too loud. As I tossed the cooler in the bed, I glanced toward the tree line. That's when I saw him. A man standing perfectly still between 2 oaks, just where the woods start before the slope turns to pavement. He was maybe 50 yards away, close enough I could see his shape, but not his face. He looked like he was wearing old military clothes, olive drab, loose-fitting, sleeves too long. He wasn't moving, just swaying slightly like he was drunk or trying to balance. At first, I figured maybe he was just another fisherman who had too much beer and was trying to take a leak in the trees. But something about his posture made me uneasy. His arms hung low, fingers loose, and he leaned forward just enough to look unnatural. I kept my head down and focused on the rods, slid them into their slots in the cab, trying not to give him the satisfaction of a second glance. But the lot was empty. No other cars, no other people. Just me and him. And that didn't make sense. This spot wasn't popular, but it wasn't unknown either. Weekends usually brought in at least a couple guys with bait buckets and folding chairs. But that afternoon, I hadn't seen another soul. The wind had picked up a little by then, and the leaves kept brushing across the pavement. Every sound was sharper than usual. I reached back into the truck to grab the straps for the tackle box, and that nagging feeling didn't go away. You know when you're being watched. It's a weird kind of pressure on the back of your neck. I stole a glance back toward the tree line, and he was still there. Same place. Still swaying. I couldn't see his face clearly. Just the outline of a beard, maybe. Or something dark on his chin. He hadn't taken a step, but I felt like he was closer. Like he'd leaned into my line of sight. That's when I figured maybe I should say something. Be a good human. I cupped my hands to my mouth and called out, "Hey, you need help or something?" I raised a hand halfway in the air, not really waving, just trying to keep it light. He didn't answer, didn't wave, nothing. But his head turned, slowly, deliberately, like a doll on a hinge. Even from that distance, I could see he was smiling, not the friendly kind either. His lips were stretched too far back, like his mouth was trying too hard to show all his teeth. The rest of his face didn't move. Eyes locked onto me, just watching. No blink. I stood there for a second, holding the strap of the tackle box, thinking maybe I'd imagined it. But no. He was grinning like he knew something I didn't. I turned away and fastened the box in the back, kept my hands moving. Tried not to look again. But the air had changed. The wind was pushing colder, sharper. I felt exposed, like there was nothing between me and whatever was about to happen. I bent to tie down the cooler and forced myself not to look back toward the trees. Just get in the truck. That's all I kept thinking. Load up. Get in. Go. But then I heard the crunch of gravel. Not leaves. Not branches. Footsteps. Deliberate. Slow. I didn't look. I reached for the driver's door, pulled it open with more force than I meant to, and slid inside. My keys were already in my jacket pocket. I dug them out and shoved one into the ignition with a slight shake in my hand. That sound of feet stopped. I couldn't tell if he'd stepped onto the pavement or not. I still hadn't looked. My gut told me not to. Just turn the engine over. Lock the doors. Don't give him the attention. Even inside the truck, I felt like I wasn't safe. Like he could see through the metal and glass. I turned the key and the engine started up loud, vibrating under me. That broke the silence. Finally. The radio kicked in, too loud on some static-filled talk station. I turned it off immediately. Didn't want the noise. Just wanted the road. As I reached to put it in reverse, I looked out through the windshield. He was still standing in the same spot, back under the trees. Same grin, same eyes, watching, not moving anymore, but still there, still smiling. I threw the last of my gear into the truck bed and climbed into the driver's seat. My hands were actually shaking as I put the key in the ignition. Through the windshield, I could see he was still standing in the exact same spot, still staring at my truck. I started the engine and began backing out of the parking space slowly. The headlights swept across the tree line, but he didn't move or react at all. I put the truck in drive and started heading toward the main road. That's when I made the mistake of checking my rearview mirror. The man was running after my truck at full sprint down the gravel road. Not jogging or walking fast, actually running like he was chasing prey. His arms were pumping and his military boots were kicking up dust clouds behind him. I hit the gas pedal harder and watched him in the mirror. He kept running even as I pulled away, his face still wearing that sick grin. I drove straight home without stopping and double-checked all my door locks that night. The image of him running after me stayed in my head for weeks. I couldn't shake the feeling that if my truck had broken down, something terrible would have happened. 3 months later, I was at the local diner and overheard two guys talking about the crazy vet who hangs around the lake area. They said he was a homeless guy with severe PTSD who sometimes acted unpredictably toward strangers. Apparently the sheriff's department knew about him but couldn't do much unless he actually committed a crime. One of them mentioned that the guy had chased a few other people over the years. I never went back to that particular fishing spot after that day. Sometimes the most dangerous encounters are with people who have nothing left to lose and minds that don't work the way they should. I bought my first house in a small Colorado town when I was 31. It was a basic ranch-style place, 1 story, small backyard, and an attached single-car garage. The price was almost too good to be true, and it had been sitting unsold for nearly a year. I found out the previous owner had died of a heart attack in the kitchen, and his adult kids just wanted to sell it off fast. I didn't really care. The inspection came back clean and everything looked fine, so I signed the papers and moved in at the start of May. The first couple weeks were busy, unpacking boxes, getting furniture delivered, trying to make the place feel less empty. During my second week, I was trying to move a solid oak dresser from the garage into the guest bedroom. It was heavy as hell, and I had to push it sideways to clear the door frame. While backing up, I misjudged the space and smacked straight into the garage door mechanism. I heard a sharp snap, followed by a loud metallic twang, and then everything unraveled. One of the springs exploded off the bracket and hit the floor like a whip. Cables jumped out of their pulleys and coiled up near the corners. A little black wheel shot across the floor and bounced off the wall near the water heater. The whole system just collapsed in a chain reaction. I stood there staring at it, trying to make sense of what just happened. It looked like a bomb went off. I got a step stool and a flashlight and spent the next 2 hours trying to piece everything back together, but it was useless. Every time I pulled on one end of a cable, the other side would slacken. The springs wouldn't catch and kept spinning loose. Eventually, I gave up. The door was locked tight in the down position, jammed by the misaligned tracks and bent torsion bar. I had to leave my truck in the driveway overnight. It wasn't a big deal, but I remember being annoyed because I had groceries in the back seat and it started drizzling. I figured I'd call a local repair company in the morning. The next day I had to leave early. I work for a small supply chain firm, and I had to drive 2 hours out to Montrose for a client meeting. I left the house at exactly 7:02 a.m., still frustrated about the garage door and half convinced it was going to cost me hundreds. I backed down the driveway, checked the side mirrors, and noticed how messy the garage still looked with all the scattered parts and tools lying around. I made a mental note to sweep up when I got home. The meeting ran late, and I didn't get back until just after 6 p.m. the following evening. I pulled into the driveway on autopilot and, out of habit, tapped the garage remote on my visor. To my complete surprise, the door glided open. Smooth, clean, quiet. At first, I assumed I hit the wrong button or that something was glitching. But when I parked and stepped into the garage, it didn't make sense. Everything had been fixed, perfectly. New torsion springs were installed. The cables were aligned and taut. The pulleys and brackets were all clean and freshly mounted. Even the panel I had knocked off the track was snapped back into place. It looked like a professional job. Tight bolts, clean adjustments, no grease smears. Not just fixed, upgraded. The floor had been swept spotless too. All the scattered tools were gone from the corner, and the cardboard box I'd left against the wall was now neatly closed and pushed aside. I just stood there for a while, staring at the motor housing, the track alignment, trying to see if maybe there was a note or a business card or anything that might explain it. Nothing. I checked the house next. All the doors were locked. The back sliding door was still latched from the inside. I checked the keypad entry on the front door, and nothing looked tampered with. I called my brother, who lives 2 hours away in Denver, just to see if maybe he'd driven down and helped out as a surprise. He had no idea what I was talking about. Same with my friend Kyle, who works construction. No one had a clue. I hadn't called any repair company yet, and there were no signs that anyone had been in the house. Nothing missing, no mud tracked inside, no new prints or scuffs on the floor. I even checked the garage light bulb for fingerprints, not really sure what I was looking for. But everything was clean, like someone had done a full service and wiped down the place after. I stood in that garage for a long time, trying to come up with a scenario that made sense. The work was too precise for some good Samaritan neighbor to have done it. No one had a spare key. The security system didn't register any entries or motion alerts. My cameras were still sitting in their boxes inside the hall closet because I hadn't set them up yet. It was like I'd imagined the whole mess to begin with, but I hadn't. I remembered every cable that whipped out, every bolt I tried to loosen, the way the spring recoiled when I touched it. I remembered how the dresser dented the panel and how my socket wrench slipped and skinned my knuckle. I kept replaying it in my head. The crash, the mess, the tension in the springs that refused to hold. And now, it was all gone. Fixed. Replaced. Erased. Nothing about it added up. And as I stood there staring at the silent, perfectly repaired door, I felt that same creeping sensation I hadn't noticed when I walked in. A chill down my arms, a prickling at the back of my neck, and this sharp realization that someone had been inside my house, and I had no idea who they were. I went around the neighborhood that weekend and knocked on every door within 3 blocks. Most people barely opened their doors more than a crack. A couple just shook their heads and apologized. But Mrs. Patterson next door was more talkative. She said she saw a pickup truck in my driveway the day the repair must have happened. Around noon, she thought. "I figured you hired someone," she said, folding her arms. "It was there for about an hour, maybe more. Some guy went in and out of the garage, but I didn't get a good look." I asked if she remembered the make or color. Dark, maybe green, could have been blue. I didn't pay that much attention. I thanked her and kept going. Nobody else remembered anything. I called every garage door company in town and a few from the next town over. Gave them my address, my name, even the rough date range. None of them had any record of a call, quote, or job done at my property. I went through my bank records to see if maybe I had forgotten and paid someone already. Nothing. I even looked for cameras on nearby houses, but most didn't have any. I called my co-workers, every single one of them, and asked point blank if they'd had anything to do with it. Nobody even knew where I lived yet, except for one guy from accounting, and he said he'd been in Phoenix that week visiting his sister. Nobody helped, nobody confessed, and nobody could explain what happened. The whole situation started to crawl under my skin. It wasn't just the fact that someone entered my garage. It was that they came in, stayed long enough to disassemble and reassemble a major piece of hardware, cleaned up after themselves, and left without a trace. They didn't steal anything. They didn't leave a note. They didn't break a lock. It was like they had keys. Like they belonged there. I stopped using the garage entirely after that. I kept parking in the driveway, even during snowstorms. I locked the interior garage door every night and started keeping a tire iron by the side of my bed. I tried not to think about it too much, but sometimes, walking past the door, I'd just stop and listen, just in case. 3 years passed. I didn't have any problems during that time. I got used to the neighborhood, added insulation to the attic, fixed up the kitchen, painted the outside walls. The garage door stayed untouched the whole time. Eventually, I figured it had just been some strange mix-up. Maybe a retired guy who forgot which house he was supposed to fix, or some kind of goodwill mistake. It stopped bothering me. That spring, I decided to upgrade the old door system. The one from the previous owner was outdated. Manual release, no smart features, clunky motor. I had a new automatic system installed, complete with app control, motion sensors, and backup battery. It was top of the line, smooth, silent, everything you'd want. At first, it worked fine. But about a week later, I noticed the door wouldn't close all the way. Then the sensors started blinking like it had been knocked out of position. I realigned it, and it worked for a day or two. Then the motor started making a grinding noise. I called the company back. The tech opened the panel and just frowned. "Wires are loose," he said, like someone pulled them. He replaced the damaged sections and adjusted the tension. 3 days later, the same thing happened. Then again, and again. The company came out 4 times in a month. Each time, the technician said it looked like someone had been tampering with the internal wiring and control board. He even asked if I had kids or roommates messing with it as a prank. "This isn't wear and tear," he said. "This looks intentional." I started parking outside again. Something about the whole situation felt too familiar. Every night when I locked the house, I looked at the garage like it wasn't part of my home anymore, like it belonged to someone else. I considered ripping the whole thing out and sealing it up permanently. But instead, I bought a weatherproof camera and mounted it above the garage door, facing downward so it would catch anything unusual. I set up alerts on my phone and waited. It didn't take long. Just after 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, my phone buzzed. Motion detected. I opened the live feed and saw someone moving slowly in the driveway. An older man, tall, white coveralls, bald spot shining under the streetlight. He walked right up to the garage and pulled out a set of tools from a cloth pouch. He worked like he'd done it 1,000 times. Opened the side panel, adjusted something near the sensor, then crouched to unscrew the motor cover. I watched him for 12 minutes before he looked up, right at the camera. He didn't flinch or run. He just stared for a few seconds, then stood up, brushed off his pants, and walked away into the night. I waited the next evening, standing near the side gate with a flashlight and a hammer in my jacket pocket. When he came back, I stepped out and blocked the path to the garage. "Who are you?" I said. "What are you doing here?" The man froze. He looked at me, blinked a few times, then said, "I'm just checking the tension on the drive chain. That model burns out if you don't keep it aligned." "You don't work for the company," I said. "No," he replied. "I used to maintain this one, for Mr. DeWitt, every 6 weeks, for 20 years. He liked it quiet." I didn't say anything. The man took a breath and looked past me, toward the door. "They always forget to oil the runner. That's why it starts grinding," I told him. I told him it'd break if he ever switched systems. "Mr. DeWitt died," I said. "This is my house now." The old man nodded slowly. "I know." I told him to leave. He did. Walked down the street without another word. The next morning, I checked the door. He hadn't done anything to it that night. But on the side panel, just above the screws, he'd left a small mark in permanent ink. 2 letters. JD. I never saw him again after that. Sometimes I wonder how many places he still visits, how many homes he still maintains in the quiet hours of the night. Some people don't stop caring, even after everything's changed. Some just keep showing up, doing the work, like they never got the message that it's over. And maybe, for them, it never really is. I was 24 and working at a marketing firm in Austin. That Thursday evening, I stopped at the H-E-B on South Lamar to grab groceries after work. I was on the phone with my sister Karen, walking toward my car around 8 p.m. The parking lot was mostly empty since it was past the dinner rush. About 2 rows over from my Honda, I noticed a white minivan sitting under a broken streetlight. Both sliding doors were wide open, which seemed weird for an unattended vehicle. I could see someone sitting in the back seat, but they weren't moving at all. I didn't say anything to Karen at first, just kind of paused mid-sentence. I think she asked if I was still there, but I didn't answer. I was trying to figure out what I was looking at. The person in the van wasn't getting out, wasn't on their phone, and wasn't even shifting. Just sitting there completely still. I slowed down near my car, which was only about 30 feet away from the van now. I kept glancing back and forth between the van and my car, trying to decide if I was overthinking things. The light above the van was out, so the only illumination was from a nearby pole across the lot, casting a dim yellow haze over the area. Something about the stillness of the person didn't sit right. I got closer to my car and could see more clearly into the minivan. There was a woman slumped against the back seat with her head tilted back at an unnatural angle. Her arms were hanging limply at her sides, and her eyes appeared to be closed. She looked like she was unconscious, or worse. I told Karen what I was seeing, and she immediately said to go back into the store and get help. I felt stupid for potentially overreacting, but something about the scene looked seriously wrong. The woman's position reminded me of how people look when they pass out from drugs or medical emergencies. I hesitated next to my car, watching the van and looking around the lot. It was still empty except for a few cars near the front of the store. No one else was nearby. I stepped toward the driver's side door of my car and unlocked it, but didn't get in. I kept looking back at the van, still no movement inside. The open doors felt like some kind of setup. It didn't make sense. Why would the doors be open if someone had passed out? And why wasn't there anyone else trying to help her? Karen was still on the line, telling me to go back inside, saying don't be dumb, just get someone. But I felt frozen. I wanted to help, but I also didn't want to walk up to that van alone. There was just something wrong with the whole thing. My gut kept telling me not to go closer. I scanned the parking lot again, and this time noticed something I hadn't seen before. A person crouched down behind the passenger side of the van. Just a shadow at first, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw movement. They were hiding. I told Karen someone else was there, crouched behind the van, and her voice got sharper. Get away from there. Go now. Go back in the store. That's when it really hit me that this might not be someone needing help. This might be something else entirely. I took a step backward and slowly closed my car door without getting in. I didn't want the sound to alert anyone. I turned and started walking, not running, trying to look normal, but with every step I felt more exposed. I was scared the person would come out from behind the van. I didn't look back until I was almost at the entrance of the store. When I did glance over my shoulder, the crouching person was gone, and the van doors were still wide open. I stepped inside the store and went straight to the customer service desk. I told the man there that there was a woman in a van who looked unconscious, maybe worse, and someone else was hiding near it. I gave him the exact location and he picked up the phone and called 911 immediately. He asked another employee to stay with me, and she led me toward the front, away from the windows, just in case. I stayed on the phone with Karen the whole time, just whispering, "I don't know what's going on," over and over. About 5 minutes later, I saw a patrol car pull up outside. Then another. A few employees and I watched from a distance through the glass as officers approached the van with flashlights drawn. One circled behind while the other moved slowly toward the open door. We couldn't see much from where we were, but I saw both of them stop suddenly. Then they turned and waved over the second car. That's the last thing I saw before one of the employees asked me to come with her again, further back from the windows. I didn't argue. I sat down in one of the break room chairs, still holding the grocery basket I never paid for. I kept thinking about that woman's neck, the way it was tilted so far back, like it had no support at all. I walked quickly back toward the store entrance while keeping an eye on the minivan. Karen stayed on the phone with me and kept insisting I find store security right away. The automatic doors opened and I spotted a security guard near customer service. He was a heavy-set guy in his 50s wearing a navy jacket and leaning against a counter. I went straight up to him, still holding my phone to my ear, and told him there was a woman in a van who looked unconscious, and another person was hiding nearby. He straightened up fast and asked me to slow down. I repeated everything. White minivan, broken light, woman not moving, someone crouched behind it. He grabbed his radio and told someone he was going outside to check something in the north lot. I followed a few feet behind him. We had taken maybe 20 steps out the door when I saw them. Two men running across the parking lot toward the white minivan. They weren't coming from the store or any obvious direction, just cutting across from behind a dumpster area near the edge of the lot. Both were wearing dark hoodies. One had a red baseball cap on backwards. They moved fast and deliberately, like they had been waiting somewhere nearby and were just waiting for the right time. The guard noticed them too and muttered, "Where the hell did they come from?" He stopped walking and grabbed his radio again, calling for someone to alert the police right away. The men reached the minivan and immediately slammed both sliding doors shut. One jumped into the driver's seat while the other got in the passenger side. The van started almost instantly, no hesitation. They didn't squeal the tires or race out. They just rolled out slow, like they'd parked after shopping. The whole thing took less than 30 seconds from the time they appeared until they were gone. I stood there frozen, watching them turn out of the lot and head south toward the traffic light. I could see part of the license plate before they turned, something like 6XC or 6XZ at the beginning. I told the guard, and he relayed it into the radio. The van was a Honda Odyssey, white, older model. The guard kept repeating everything clearly while still watching the road, like maybe they'd turn back around. But they didn't. I felt sick standing there. I told Karen the men took the van. She asked if the woman was still inside and I said I didn't know. I hadn't seen her move, not once, and they shut the doors so fast I never saw inside again. I hung up and walked back inside with the guard. We waited near the front while he got a manager. A few minutes later, the store locked the front doors and started asking customers to stay put. People were confused but didn't complain much. Police showed up about 10 minutes later. 2 cruisers at first, then a third. They separated me and the guard and started asking questions. I told them everything I saw, starting from when I noticed the van to when the men showed up and drove off. They asked if I could describe the men, and I gave them what I remembered. Both had short hair, maybe late 20s or early 30s, average build. One had a red hat, the other wore all black. I mentioned the license plate, and that I thought the van was a Honda. The officers went straight to the store's security office to review the parking lot footage. After about 20 minutes, one of them came back and said they had good video. They got the full license plate and clear shots of both men's faces. He didn't show me the footage, just nodded and said they were confident they could ID them. He mentioned the van was registered to someone in Buda with a history of drug and assault charges, but they'd need more evidence before making arrests. He gave me a case number and said they'd follow up if needed. The rest of the night was a blur. I went home without the groceries, sat on my couch for hours without turning on the TV. I kept picturing the way that woman looked in the seat, how her head hung back, how limp her arms were. I couldn't stop thinking about the crouching man behind the van and how fast the other two had moved, like it was planned, like they were waiting for anyone to get too close. Weeks went by. I didn't hear anything. I figured maybe it was nothing. Maybe she was fine. Maybe it was a weird medical emergency and they were taking her to a hospital. But none of it felt right. 6 months later, I got a call from a detective. He said the case had been reassigned to a joint task force investigating human trafficking in Central Texas. The van had been found in an impound lot near San Antonio, abandoned, wiped clean. No sign of the woman. The 2 men from the footage were still being investigated but hadn't been arrested yet. He asked if I was willing to testify if it came to that. I said yes, but he warned me it might be years before anything happened. I asked him if they ever found the woman, and he just said no. No one fitting her description had turned up. I asked if it was likely she had been trafficked, and he said they didn't know. Only that her face didn't match any known missing persons reports. I still think about her sometimes. Her head tilted back like her neck had no bones, eyes closed, the streetlight above her blown out. I wonder if my phone call made a difference. I wonder if I should have run to the van instead of backing away. I did what people tell you to do. Don't intervene, call for help, let professionals handle it. But sometimes I wonder if that woman's last chance was standing 30 feet away, holding a phone and doing nothing but watching.